joining now, skip forward. This is a stream, so I'm going to wait for some folks to come in here before I start reacting. And YouTube always acts funny. It always makes me wait like an extra 3 minutes before it makes it to wherever it's supposed to go. Let's see. Sending data. There we go. Probably because I have low latency. Play. All right, beautiful. I'm in business on YouTube. No. Oh, YouTube's being funny. I gotta pull up my YouTube studio again. It's doing one of those it detected funny whatever. Okay. YouTube studio. Yo, Will, welcome in, man. Good to see you. My bad. I'm just taking a couple minutes to see if some other folks come in, and then we're going to watch The War on Men and Fathers. And we'll see if that's pretty good. Someone sent that to me through email. It's actually Dan the Man who is in here.
Gentlemen, this is Democracy Manifest.
Bad Gal Beach is now a fellow outlaw. Thanks for the follow on Twitch over there. I usually don't pay too much attention to the Twitch just because like I'm multi-streaming to it. So I am on YouTube. Yo, Klaus, welcome in, bro. Good to see you, man. I'm just trying to get my YouTube studio back up. I am glad that I'm on. Oh God, that just reminded me of that totally reminded me of my last disaster stream where the whole thing died. Hopefully that doesn't happen again. All right, sweet. We're back in business. We're back in business. All right, beautiful. Well, we'll be watching this soon. I hope everybody's doing okay. Klaus, I appreciate you being in here. Will, thank you as well. I've been watching your TikToks. You guys should find Will on TikTok. Let me type in his. I think it's this 7. And follow his YouTube channel. He makes shorts and they're pretty funny. But other than that, man, I just I don't know what's going on with me today, bro. I felt hella tired earlier. I took this big nap. I flew my drone in the morning. That's all I wanted to do today. You guys should consider buying a drone if you don't have one. One of those DJI drones. I got a DJI Air 3 and I love flying that thing, man. It's like it's very freeing, you know. You can like fly it around and then you can see the same stuff you see every day, but from a completely different perspective. It's like, I love the ability of being able to go up 400 feet in the air. That is the limit here in the US from the FAA for a recreational pilot, drone pilot. And man, I was taking pictures this morning, and from my house I can see like downtown Sacramento, which is usually like 10 or 15 minute drive away depending on traffic. And it's just really cool. Or when I went to the California coast, I can fly my drone off like the cliffs, and then I can get all this footage of the cliffs, and I would never otherwise be able to do that. And if you think like, what, 20 years ago, I mean, you had to have a helicopter with the guy hanging out the side of it holding the camera to be able to get that. Yo, Trevor, welcome in, man. Good to see you. Hey, Shah, I won't be able to make it to today's stream. Looking forward to watch afterwards. Hey, no worries, man. You have a great weekend. Appreciate you coming in here and saying hi. Wow, Caesar Quintana, man, with the donation right off the bat. What's up, Shah? Great video dowries the other day. Oh, you watched the dowry video. I'm glad you like that. I think I saw your comment on there. Also, I got a new sound effect, but it's like an incomplete sound effect because I want to add some like Super Mario, I don't know, mushroom sounds and things. But this is my money sound effect. I hope I don't get copyrighted for this. Thank you for the donation, man. Very, very much appreciated. Very much appreciated. All right, that's been playing too long. It's probably gonna copyright me. Again, thank you. Yeah, that video was kind of tough for me. I had to record that like a good 10 times because I just wasn't happy with it, and I'm still not happy with it. Like that was a video where I knew I was never gonna fully be happy with it. You know, it's just such a big topic. There's so many things, and I didn't want it to be too long. It was already 33 minutes. I got the DJI Air 3. Oh, nice. The DJI Mini 3 Pro. Oh, yeah. The Mini 3 Pro is also really nice. And that one's below like 250 grams. So you can, I don't even think you need the trust certificate or whatever to fly that. And the DJI FPV. Wow. Yo, I don't have the FPV drone, but a buddy does. And that's the one that you can like follow like sports cars with. That one's super cool. Patrick Trainer, man, I remember you, Patrick. It's been a while. Hey, bro, long time. Good to see you. Good to see you too, man. I haven't done like gaming specific streams in a while. Sometimes I'll do them, but I do like to throw stuff on the Twitch. I worked so hard to become an affiliate on Twitch. It was such a journey for me. And like I hit 300 followers and then Twitch changed something to where you couldn't sort from low to high on the just chatting category, and that was it. Like no matter how much I streamed after that, like me getting followers, it was over. So then I just was like, you know what? I'm just going to focus on YouTube. So now sometimes what I do is I just freaking multi-stream over to Twitch just to keep it in the game. But I always have these dreams like of going back to Twitch someday and just doing video games, you know, and maybe just being like a dedicated Twitch streamer. But, you know, we'll see. Or just getting the YouTube audience to get used to me doing stuff I want to do, like make models and open up action figures. I got so many action figures that are unopened because I have like this problem now, you know. I just like, I'll buy something that's worth it, and then like I'll be like, I'll just leave it in the box. It's going to be worth more in a couple years, and then I'll sell it someday. Like even some of this stuff, that Keanu Reeves right there, it's an open used Keanu Reeves, and it's a used one is like $400 or $500, you know. And I got it for like when it was new for $250. And then now I just don't open anything. Now I got like 6 other things. I never bothered to open them. And then when I think about opening them, I start having this like crisis of identity and thinking, what am I doing? I'm just opening up this thing for no reason. But I always tell myself if I'm going to open it, I'll open it up on stream. That way people can watch it. And then I never do that. So that's kind of my situation. Anyways, Patrick Trainer, I know you probably followed me back in the day from when I was playing Super Mario Maker. But if you're going to watch my stream today, it's going to be about the war on men and fathers. Just to give you a heads up. Sadly, there is no Mario making today, but I do still love Mario. Yeah, man, I remember that's when I found you on Twitch reading horrible histories. Oh, yeah. Oh, man, that was towards the end of my gaming career on Twitch, and then I started reading on Twitch. But I'm never on here anymore, to be honest. We still follow each other on Insta. Oh, yeah, that's true. Dude, I like your stuff whenever I see it. I'm always like, and I can't remember even how I know you, and I'm like, you know what? That's a nice picture, or like, this is a nice thing. I'll just hit the like button because why not, man? I'm all about hitting the like button for people, especially smaller creators, just to do it. It would be pretty hard to get me to not like somebody's stuff, and then much harder to get me to hit the dislike button. Dislike button is like, I'd have to really be mad about something. Me not liking something is like, well, that would be the equivalent of the dislike button for me. But for most people, I know how much like it's work to be able to create things. So I'm always like, you know what? I'm just going to like it just because they went through the trouble. But, yeah, so I say we just get into the show. We got the folks in here. We got Caesar. We got Will. We got Klaus. Trevor is with us in spirit. He will be back later. We got Patrick Trainer hanging out with us today. So this is Stephen Baskerville. And actually, one of the folks I was hoping to see in here was Dan. He usually comes in later, but he emailed me after the stream to the thisisshahofficial@gmail.com email. And he was watching this. He thought it was pretty interesting. It doesn't have many views. It's got 350 views. And it's a pretty good interview with the PhD professor here that studies men's issues. So I felt like it deserves a little bit more love. I've never heard of this guy. I'll probably end up subscribing by the end of it. But they talk a little bit about the history and how things kind of changed for men. So I figured, why not? Why not watch this, man? And then the video, I had another video originally planned. Let me see if I can find it. But the thing is the full interview is not on YouTube. It's on something else. This right here, it's Doug Wilson and this guy, Aaron Wrenn. And Aaron Wrenn, if you remember, I actually did a stream with him interviewing Stephen Baskerville. So I actually like his channel. And this one is How the Church Fails Men. And, it's more church oriented and about that. But it was still interesting to me because it kind of, discusses some of the stuff we talk about on this channel. So I wanted to find the full interview of this, and I have to go to his website to do it. So that's probably what's going to be next week. But then Dan sent me this, and I was like, oh man, that was loud. Sorry about that, guys. Let me just mute that till that's over. The War on Men and its impact on society. Okay. As soon as I see Stephen, there we go.
President of ACFC, if I said that right.
That is loud.
Which is how I first got to know him.
All right, yeah, so we'll be getting in this today. It's pretty long. I don't know if we're going to watch the whole thing. But, we'll see how it goes. Usually with these kinds of things, the first 40 minutes or so is, the best part of the interview, and then it just starts to be, what it is. But maybe we'll get surprised. So I think I don't know if he's an expat, but I think he lives overseas now in Europe. But I've read some of his professional work, just a little bit of it, and it's pretty good. I mean, it's definitely PhD level. That's at least what it appears to me, and I can tell he's very educated in how family law actually works in the U.S. just from some of the stuff I heard from him before. So that's why I follow him on Twitter, just and so I see his posts and stuff, and I think he's got a decent handle on a lot of these things.
I read his book called Taken into Custody, and we'll get into that a little bit. It's ballpark, 15 or so years old now, but I think it's just as valid today as it was back then, perhaps more so. But before we get into that, Mr. Baskerville, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and introduce yourself to the audience?
Okay, thank you. It's good to be here. I'm an academic. I work at...
Oh, man, that audio was not good, but it's okay. We're going to work through it.
At a university in Warsaw, in Poland. And I've been working in universities for about 35 years. I've wrote most of those books when I was working in the United States.
This is probably why they boosted the sound so much.
A variety of institutions. I might add that those books cost me a couple of academic jobs. It's not really very safe to write about these things. I think it's virtually impossible that I would ever work in the academic world in the United States ever again.
Damn, I should have listened to that sound before I did this. If it becomes too much for you guys, what we'll do is just move over to the Aaron Wrenn thing. But I'm going to give it the good college try here.
There is, as you probably know, a virtual news blackout on these issues. Mm-hmm. And so I've been, I started writing about these things, as you say, about 25 years ago. In the late 90s, I devoted all my attention to it from about the late 90s onward.
That guy was early. Child support reform happened in 96. And that's when all the stuff went through Congress. And, a lot of the effects of that wouldn't truly be felt probably, going forward from then. But it still takes time for people, the general mass, to understand, how bad it is. So he must have been looking at those changes as it was happening and seeing what was coming down the line.
And I found that I was basically blackballed, ostracized from the academic profession in the United States.
Yeah, it's completely muffled. I'm gonna try my best here. This is gonna be my fault for not reviewing the footage prior to this, but man, just like the smallest change, honestly, like probably $200, maybe like $250, even less, could get his audio from like there to absolutely beautiful. You know what I mean? Get a Audio Technica AT2020 and get like a Focusrite 2i2 that you could probably find on sale if you watch it on Amazon, and then you're golden.
And that's that's where I've been ever since.
So I was not aware that you had lost a couple of jobs on that, but I'm also not in the least bit surprised. One of the things, as someone who also speaks out on the issues that men and boys face, is they come to try and cancel me all the time. There isn't a day that goes the most.
Forgive me, guys.
I do think
that's just like every creator has to talk about getting
one advantage
canceled.
of social media. I mentioned they blackballed you. Did they?
And they're not supposed to be. You're not supposed to be.
Saying it, I think, because they want to protect themselves from any backlash on it. I see that.
Absolutely.
I see it with the media also, right?
Yeah, we're still talking about getting canceled.
Locking men up for supposedly
there we
things
go.
like non-payment of child support and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the U.S. and Canada are by far the worst countries. They don't even do that yet in Britain. So,
man, I was just watching a Legion of Men episode, and it got me very, I don't know, it just made me remember some things. And it was just, he was watching a report about retirement and how Gen X is coming up now towards retirement. And so many of them are not prepared for retirement. And that's probably going to be, a running theme with millennials and Gen Z. And I was, when I was doing the dowry video, I was thinking about inheritance and all that stuff, because inheritance and dowry and all that stuff plays in together. So, marriage really is a time where wealth transfer happens from older generations to younger generations. Historically, that is. And then that keeps things moving. You know what I mean? And in the society we live in, it's like most people don't have wealth to pass on because it either got juiced by family law. If the parents went through a divorce, there goes any kind, passing on the financial torch there is harder to do when parents split up. And then just the way we live in retirement, I mean, things are so inflated out of control almost now. It's just no wonder why marriage is in the dumps too, because I don't know, everybody's just kind of out on your own. The culture is like when you're 18, you got to figure it out. And you're probably not going to most people aren't going to get help from their parents in terms of that kind of stuff. But traditionally, that was the case. And then watching that thing on retirement, it's just like, man, it's looking bad coming down the line here.
In some respects, I wouldn't expect as much attention, but here, there's virtually nothing here. The European media takes its cue from the United States, and even here in Eastern Europe, the media take their cue from Western Europe and from the U.S. So it's all the mainstream media, and we see this now in the last few years with other issues with things like the MAGA phenomenon and the war in Ukraine and the January 6th and Donald Trump and all this. The media just black out what they don't want to report.
Mm-hmm.
Caesar says, I like what you said in your video about modern day traditional marriage as cosplay. Yeah. Oh yeah. I remember your comment now. That's what you put. I hearted that. Yeah, it is, right? Because it's like when it's almost like they're just making it up. Like they're just trying to play house, but it's not the real thing in itself, and it's just, they're just like, this is what traditionalism is. And it's like, well, not really, they're just trying to play pretend. And then when you look at it, it's like, there's all these actual moving parts that need to happen for a traditional outcome to occur, and all we have left is just these kind of homages to them, but not the actual thing in itself. And cosplay really is a great word for that. And, whether it's conservative trad wives, like if you heard like the trad wife movement, kind of thing where they're just kind of advertising the look of it on social media, but they're just as much feminists as everybody else. They're just cosplaying it. You know what I mean? And making it a young man's job to be the sole provider of everything, to start up a house for a new family, is just historically untrue, especially in Western civilization, because marriages in Western civilization came with the dowry from the woman's family to the man to start up the household. The biggest takeaway I wanted people to get from the film, or from that video, I don't even know if I did a good job, was I was trying to, it's not even about bringing the dowry back. I think that's what some people who didn't watch it all the way probably thought I was getting at. But like, if they made it to the end, what I'm really getting at is the fact that these cosplaying the traditionalist cosplayers are trying to spread around this mythology that men have to pay for everything and bring everything into the marriage. And that's not even traditional at all. That's just not true, especially not a young guy. And it's like if people want their kids getting married early, it requires some investment of wealth from an older generation into the young one. So that was just a big realization to me reading about that stuff.
No different really than in the U.S.
It's just like, a dowry really is the daughter's inheritance from her family. And it's like, if you're going to have a relationship with your father-in-law, part of that respect for that relationship is his investment into you and his daughter's relationship. And that's how it's been here.
Yeah, my experience, because I do a live show on Wednesdays, and I have people from all around the world. And it mirrors what you were talking about. I had somebody just kind of chirp in from Bulgaria last week, and he was saying what you're saying is in the U.S. is happening here. The UK, I hear it all the time from the guys in the UK. The UK follows the U.S. and Canada's lead pretty much. A little bit of a lag behind it, a few months perhaps, but I do. One thing that I was encouraged by, and is at least in the UK, and I know they've been trying to do the same in the U.S. is the UK is trying to get a minister for men. There's a pretty vocal group. They're not getting anywhere because obviously the feminists don't want that, even though there's been a minister for women for over a decade now. And I know people like Dr. Warren Farrell and others.
That's interesting, hearing how the UK works in terms of a minister. There's a minister for women's issues, and they're trying to get a minister for men, which would go a long way. I think the equivalent for us in the US is trying to get like a lobby group going. I don't know. I think if there had to be a step to take in the next direction, it would have to be that. And it's like, you better pray whoever starts that is legitimate, not someone just taking donations and money for no reason. But a lobby group that's like the NRA, except it's a lobby group for men's rights issues that actually lobbies politicians and does things the right way in order to influence legislation to be more fair to men, I think would be the thing that we actually need to get stuff changed. You know what I mean? And I think there'd be plenty of guys out there that would donate to a lobby group like that, because then men could have a place to get together and try to work on some of this, agree on stuff, and then decide how they're going to go about, essentially lobbying politicians. It's a lot better word than bribe, to start, pushing forward a platform for men.
Have tried to get an office for men, which is a parallel or equivalent to the office for women that exists, and gotten nowhere. But whereas I saw 10 years ago, they wouldn't even allow us to talk about it. At least I'm not trying to say it's big. It's very tiny. I think there's a little bit of movement, and it begs the question, having read your book many years ago, with regard to fathers, and I have made this argument many times on this show that I can trace every societal ill that exists right now back to fatherlessness, and how society, the government, women's groups, the whole gamut of them have actively worked to eliminate fathers, to basically turn them into wallets. And I remember when I was reading Taken into Custody, you were going down that path 15 years ago, and I don't think it's changed much. What were you seeing then, and what are any differences, if any, that you're seeing now?
That's an interesting question, especially someone like this. That's kind of why I wanted to watch it, because this guy is almost like a historian at this point. He's been watching this whole thing unfold for a very long time.
I don't really see any differences. I think it's
Dang, no differences. I was afraid he was going to say that. Hope the muffled voice isn't so bad. I'm getting kind of used to it, so I think I can make it through this. I hope you guys feel the same.
Nothing has changed since I wrote Taken into Custody, as far as I can tell. I mean, in some aspects of the the kind of radical sexual agenda has gotten more mainstream attention in some respects. For example, when I published that book in 2007, transgenderism was not a big issue yet. Mm-hmm. And even same-sex marriage was only starting to become an issue. So in those respects, those kinds of issues have become more salient, more prominent, and they've been taken up by these, so-called pro-family, usually Christian groups. So that, but I regard those matters as somewhat fringe, and I don't think they're actually even that important. But you can see that this kind of radical sexual ideology has become more extreme, if you like, more, it's gotten more far out on the left, and it's the battlegrounds over things like transgenderism, and but it really hasn't. Those things are symptoms, much more than they are, the heart of the problem, and they're simply the outgrowth of the kind of politics that fathers in particular, have been experiencing for much longer. So, I guess my point is then, my feeling is that because this has been unaddressed, because the things that I tried to say and taken into custody and what others have tried to say in similar writings 15, 20 years ago, because those things were ignored, unaddressed, then the sexual radicals, the radical sexual ideology has only become more extreme or more kind of crazy in some ways. Mm-hmm. But the essence of it really is just as bad as ever, like you say. The social ills, the social pathologies, which can be attributed to fatherlessness, and we were saying this 15, 20 years ago. These things were already being said. But you hear them more and more nowadays. People like Tucker Carlson say it, Larry Elder, a whole bunch of, I compiled in my new book a bunch of websites where these conservative Candace Owens, they all come out with these sound bites saying fatherlessness is the problem, fatherlessness is the heart of all social ills. And they're right about this. And to this extent, they're correct and they're forthright. But they won't take the next step and say, yes, but the obvious next question, what is the cause of fatherlessness? And they don't want to go on about that. They don't want to say it. They won't say a word about that.
Or they take the other.
I think that kind of encapsulates how a lot of men, or just a lot of folks, feel, a lot of us anyways, when it comes to these issues. Because we see what he kind of described was just, he mentioned conservatives, basically tradcons, and when tradcons talk about this, they'll point to fatherlessness as a huge issue, but then instead of pointing the finger at the elephant in the room, they'll just be like, well, men need to try harder, men need to step up, instead of getting at like the actual legal structures that have contributed to that greatly.
Attack, because Vivek Ramaswamy went, and I don't know if you saw this, but back in, I think it was January, he was on a podcast, and one of his solutions to fatherlessness was to force men to pay child support in utero. And I'm like,
I actually remember that. Let me see if I can find that. I remember when that happened, and I remember thinking that is so ridiculous. Men need to pay child support. Come on, Google, don't fail me now. While women are pregnant. Don't fail me now. And it's failed me. Oh, hold on. No. Oh, well. No dice, guys. It's too bad. I remember when he said that, though. He basically, he was just the typical conservative response. He was confronted with the same issue, and then it became, well, men need to step up more, and we should even charge men child support while the woman's pregnant, basically. And to me, that's crazy because, working at a child support agency, we can't even charge child support we can't do that until after a baby is born and alive and has, a name and a social security number and a birth date. And I mean, a big reason for that is because, well, first if he wants a genetic test or something, especially prior, if paternity is not established, we have to be able to give him that. And, if she's pregnant, you can't do that. The only people who are really, I guess, on the hook for a woman while she's pregnant, someone who's married, because that's built into that. Or if you're an active duty serviceman and you're getting deployed on active duty, you can sign a paternity declaration while your, girlfriend's pregnant, so that you can assume paternity. They make it seem like it's for you, but it's just really because they're like, okay, this guy's going, they're not married. Let's just try to make sure that we have a dad on the books for this guy. And that's the only person that can accept paternity for a child prior to them being born.
That's fraught with issues, but how does that address anything, right? You're trying to get points with the women. I get that. I understand it from a political perspective and trying to get elected. I get that part of it. But you're not helping families. You're not helping children, and you're certainly not helping, I would argue, both men and women. But yet,
that's correct. In fact, I show in my book, and in all my books I touch on this, the child support just simply makes the system worse. It's, again, the old thing, your child support is just another subsidy on single motherhood, just like welfare is a subsidy on single motherhood. And this Ronald Reagan.
It's exactly what it is. It's just an extended form of welfare, to be honest. That's what child support is, and that's why it's so one-sided against the men. In a sense, it's just about getting the money where the money is, and it's all about the state just coming into your business like that to take money to subsidize single motherhood.
Pointed out, if you subsidize something, you get more of it. So the child support's only going to make it worse. And I think Vivek lost a lot of support on that. I think men are were one of his natural constituencies, as they are for Donald Trump. We see now black men especially moving toward Donald Trump.
I know people want to vote. I get it. And, I've voted in the last 4 elections. This will be my first time I don't vote. But when it comes to men's issues, I think a lot of them just take men's votes for granted. And I think the only thing that can really get their attention is just like if a lot of men got together and said, you know what, I'm not even voting this election. Because then they'd be like, oh, my God, we lost badly. And it was because a lot of men didn't vote for us. Then they'd really have to be honest about why that is. But people will say you're throwing away your vote, you should use it. There's no other way to change the system. That's true, but it would take some collective effort on our part to pull that off.
And Vivek, and I think he lost that. He lost me. He lost a lot of men by that kind of naked.
Well, I remember hearing that clip and I was like, oh my God, because Vivek comes off as a very sharp guy. He's definitely very smart. But saying something that stupid was just like, oh God, no, that's terrible. That's worse than having the other side in power. Because it's just like obviously coming after men when it's not a problem can be laid at the feet of men.
Pandering to the feminists. And,
without question, I was a huge supporter of his. I had, for lack of a better.
Yo, Robert, man, it's been a while since I've seen you in here, man. It's good to see you. Big ups. Man, you know what? I've been waiting for a long time to see you in here because I wanted to show you my Siddhartha book. After the last time we talked, I went and bought a copy of that. I still got to read it, but I do have that now. So welcome in, man. It's good to see you. I'm just voting for Trump. Yeah, I'm not, again, a lot of people are going to. And I get it, you know what I mean? For me, I'm just like, I don't know. I think this cycle, I'm kind of exasperated. I'm just kind of done with the whole thing. Too much circus for me.
I was drinking the Kool-Aid, right? I mean, I had some issues with some of it, but my argument has always been, if you can find 70, 75, 80% common ground, I can support that politician. And I was there with him. And then he came out with that, and he lost me. And I'll tell you, as someone with, it's not a huge following on social media, but pretty decent one, he lost men. That was a very good point you made. And, he's up for consideration as VP. And I'm like, how can I vote for someone that is overtly stating, I'm going to blame men for men struggling?
Yeah, that was how I felt too. And then, I think he dropped out of the race. I can't remember if that clip was before or after. And then he was maybe going to be selected as VP, but then Trump selects J.D. Vance, and J.D. Vance has a clip of him talking about giving extra votes to people with kids, and to me that came off as a little kind of like a stupid tongue-in-cheek idea, because he thinks it would help the conservatives, but at the same time, you know, if you have a single mom with 6 kids out there living off of welfare and she gets 7 votes now, you know what I mean? And not even like, not here to demonize anybody. I'm just saying, like, in his imagination, oh, good American families that are together will have more voting power than these other degenerates on the other side of the railroad tracks. Because I know that's how he was thinking, probably. But then it's just funny because it was just such a stupid idea. Like, just as stupid, if not dumber, than the thing Vivek said. And then that's the actual VP choice. I don't blame Trump for choosing him. I mean, I guess, okay, he's from Ohio. I think that's a swing state. So he's like, let's get a guy from a swing state. Hopefully the state will vote for their guy, and then, you know, I don't have to worry about that swing state. I can work on the other ones. Yeah, I mean, they're both joking. That's true, but it also kind of betrays a sense of... I'm not convinced that they really understand a lot of these things. You know what I mean? It's just like...
Doesn't make sense.
You're exactly right about that. My theory about some... Notice, too, that they're in contrast with some politicians who simply stay silent about it. In other words, like Trump. Trump doesn't defend men or criticize the family courts, but he also doesn't condemn them. And my suspicion is that he knows what's going on, and he doesn't want to get burned by it, but he also doesn't want to say stupid things. I find the same thing with Tucker Carlson, for example, and some other journalists.
I think the one thing about Trump is that, you know, he's been through a few divorces, so I mean, at least he understands it from that angle. But yeah, he's not vocal about it, but, you know.
He calls attention to it. His commentaries are full of little hints. And I think he knows. I think he knows what's going on in the family courts. Mm-hmm. And if he says it explicitly, he'll be burned and canceled, and that'll be the end of him. So he doesn't come out, he doesn't do the heroic thing, but he also doesn't do the cheap pandering that Ramaswamy did.
Right. Well, it's funny, too, because, you know, I see things on the other side as well, as someone who's lobbied in both New York State and North Carolina on behalf of things like shared parenting and, you know, men's mental health, trying to raise funding for that, trying to get domestic violence shelters. I see this on the Republican side often, exactly what you're talking about. They're aware of the issues. They'll talk to you individually about them, but publicly,
that's interesting.
It's, you know, just like the third rail of Social Security. We're not going there. But I also see the same thing on the other side. One argument I've always made is neither party, at least in the United States, cares about men. Some will argue one is worse than the other. I honestly think it's 6 of one, half dozen of another when it comes to men's and boys' issues.
I mean, it's not like one side is claiming some is a couch effer or anything. Is that true or not? I heard that in passing. I never looked deeper into it because I was like, oh, that's kind of... Like, maybe it was true, maybe not. I really don't even know. It does sound kind of like, you know, an exaggeration. But we'll see.
But again, I'm reflecting back. I remember reading your book and how you were talking about how the governments, and I'll say Western governments, meaning primarily U.S., Canada, as you mentioned earlier, decided to demonize men. And it started in the 70s when they were, you know, reforming child support. I argue it really ramped up in the 90s, you know, during the Clinton administration.
Yeah, 70s was the creation of the federal child support program. That was 75. And then 90s, 96 was welfare reform, which also beefed up child support a lot. But yeah, you know, it's interesting to hear about like that time, and I think they're going to get into it more. Just sort of that time, what it was like. You know, I wasn't alive then, but to go back and read it, Dan, who sent me this video, sent me a few articles about the ERA. I think it was the Equal Rights Amendment. Let me see if I could pull it up. And just kind of the debates that they were having around that time. And he sent me some articles from women who were kind of on the other side. And what was her name again? It was like Phyllis Schlafly or something like that. I could not pronounce it. Oh damn. Phyllis Schlafly. Schlafly. But yeah, she had an interesting interview because she was against the Equal Rights Amendment. God, I hope there's no pop-ups. There are so many pop-ups when I pull this up on my cell phone. And it was just kind of interesting because so this was written in the Washington Star in 1976, and here's her opinion. Like, what do you make of the recent setbacks of the Equal Rights Amendment and the defeat of state equal rights amendment in New York and New Jersey? And Equal Rights Amendment, you know, was about making women on par legally with men. And, you know, she seems like someone from a bygone era. Like, that's like a real, like one of these ladies, you know. Schlafly. Oh, perfect. Robert, are you familiar with her too? Maybe you remember hearing about her. I think she was pretty popular back then. But what Dan wrote was that she kind of got sidelined by the conservatives because what happened to her son got screwed over by family court pretty hard. So she started speaking against those issues and how it affected men, and she kind of got shunned from the conservative community. But it was interesting going back and reading about what things were like around this time and, you know, kind of looking at it now. But one of my goals is to I'm always looking for like papers and academic papers about this kind of thing. And it would be nice to be able to piece together like a very solid history of like all the events and what really happened. Like, I would love to be able to have that in my mind. I think they show that despite the fact that the proponents had nearly 100% of the press on their side, so, you know, the media was engaged in demonizing men and pandering to the women, and despite the fact that they had nearly 100% of the politicians who cared to commit themselves on their side, nevertheless, the voters recognize that the ERA is a fraud and they are against it. They recognize it as a takeaway of women's rights. So she's trying to argue that the Equal Rights Amendment was taking away from women's rights, and she talks about things like alimony. But, you know, alimony was always paid from men to women. And by the Equal Rights Amendment would change that to mean that sometimes even women can have to pay men depending on the situation. They won't recognize it won't do anything good for women, and so they're against it. Now, of course, someone like this would be, you know, anybody on the other side are going to see this and say, you know, she's terrible or something. But she was more about keeping it traditional, you can say, and probably in a forthright manner. The New York State support law is a beautiful law. It says the husband must support their minor children under age 21. And, you know, in terms of child support too, right, emancipation's 21 for kids in New York. It's perfectly obvious that when you apply the ERA to that law, it becomes immediately unconstitutional and it knocks it out. So you have taken away the right of the wife to be supported and to have her minor children supported. Obviously, this is an attack on the rights of the wife and on the family. Now, if there has been a divorce, she isn't his wife anymore. The principal thing that ERA does is to take away the right of the wife in an ongoing marriage, the wife in the home. So I don't know. It's just interesting. And here's her doing her thing. It was just such a different time, you know. But, you know, is the ERA going away? Probably not. Probably not. Too much to get into on a podcast. Yeah. So, man, I have so many things that I want to read. Like, I don't even know why I'm doing this to myself, but it's like an addiction for me. I can't stop. I have like 5 books that I'm trying to read right now in my spare time, and just papers and things. And I wish my mind could get more organized so I can more efficiently attack all that stuff. But stuff like this, I'd like to be able to read more also. And, you know, this is going to... So, you know, she's kind of an original TradCon. Do you think that... But not like a sort of cosplayer TradCon that we see today. Do you think that is the reason men support their wives because it's the law? She says, yes, I do, because it is the duty, and I think duty is an honorable word. I think when men get married, they know that they are taking on the duty of supporting their wives. I would say that's even true for a large extent. But, you know, back in that time before... Well, this is 76, so this is like 7 years after no-fault divorce. But if this is in New York, they didn't get no-fault divorce till later. But, you know, back in that time when you're getting married, it's like, yeah, you know, okay, yeah, you're the husband, fine. And then women had a limit and check on their power, and then it moves to no-fault divorce, and that's how you get cosplaying TradCons who won't speak against a lot of that stuff. But, you know, I think she would have, so... I'm kind of learning about her. Let me just read one more. We'll get back to the video. Do you think that women today really are getting married to be supported? Well, even if you think that in the future the law should be changed, I think it is a gross invasion of the property rights of women in existing marriages to come along and say, now as a new principle of law, no matter that you went into marriage 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, thinking that the marriage contract meant definite relationship. Too bad, sister, you're on your own now, and that's what they're saying. And, you know, men are victims of this too, right? You get married today thinking it's going to be, you know, I mean, unless you're watching this content, it's going to be a lifetime marriage. And then it's not, right? Thinking it's a marriage contract. But fortunately, it's not. And really, it's too bad, brother. Too bad. You know, pay up. You're on your own now. And that's what they're saying. So, whatever. Cosplay track-ons. Exactly. It's Complicated Channel has a video. He has a good word for it, which is undercover feminists. I like that one too because it's something only a TradCon presenting individual can pull off. And you know, a lot of women will do that when they're ready to get married, is present themselves in a more traditional way. I mean, they'll even say so as much, I'm traditional, you know, but then once they get what they're looking for out of that, then all of a sudden they change up on you and the feminist comes out.
Where they passed all these laws. Deadbeat dad became the in phrase. It was
deadbeat dad. Yeah, deadbeat dad was the in phrase back then. And then on the other side, it was welfare queen, right? And that's how they passed a lot of the child support stuff because, you know, they had all this kind of mythology in the media. There was the deadbeat dad who didn't want to take care of his kids. Then there was the welfare queen who just wanted to live off welfare. And back then, you know, you can get welfare pretty much indefinitely. Welfare went through some changes. It started out for widows of like World War II. Then it just went into women who had gotten pregnant and weren't married by like the 70s. And somewhere around that time, they had these sort of like civil rights lawsuits regarding welfare. Because like, let's say a woman had a kid and then she got like a new boyfriend and the boyfriend was living in the house with her. She was living in the house with the boyfriend. If the welfare workers found that out, they would cut off welfare because it was like if there was a man in the house, he had to support you and the kid, even if it wasn't his kid. Just that's what the expectation was. But then there were civil rights lawsuits that basically made welfare into an entitlement program. So they couldn't do that anymore. And then the roles started increasing even more because all those people were able to get on welfare, and they just kind of got welfare indefinitely. And then in the mid-90s, they beefed up child support in an attempt to kind of curtail some of this welfare spending. And the women would time out after 2 years, unless, you know, there's exceptions granted. But the kids can receive it, you know, the whole time they're children. So,
but, you know, one question I have, and I want to get it out to you, is why? What's the benefit to the governments? You can make arguments why they did it for women and all that, but to the government, why would they think it's a good thing to demonize men?
Well, there's a number of reasons for that, and it's a very good question.
I wonder what he'll say. You know, my mind goes immediately to subsidizing welfare and Social Security, and just being kind of unfair for men in order to extract more money out. But let's see.
And I do talk about that a little bit about that in all my books. I mean, on the one hand, there's the simple ideological matter, you know, the pandering to the feminists, and they will criticize the feminists when it comes to things like abortion, but they won't criticize them on the fatherhood issue at all. So there's that. There's definitely the pandering. There's also there's the pecuniary interest. There's the way the money, the politicians of all political parties, especially the lawyers, are raking in the money from child support enforcement. I mean, every state in America is making a profit off child support enforcement.
Yeah, Robert, I was thinking that too. That was like my second thing is votes. I mean, it's the obvious pandering to that, you know. I often think about that with movies too. You know, I have this thing like where I rarely watch newer movies, and when I do, it's like the stories don't seem that good. There's the obvious pandering, and I'm like, you know, I usually watch movies I just watch older movies now if I even sit down to watch movies. But you know, I can't even get mad at TV or media, and like, who knows? You know, they probably know their audience better, obviously better than me. Maybe it's mostly women who watches TV now, and that's why most things you see, it's like there's got to be the the woman that plays the role of the hero guy now, because those are the only people who are watching it, you know.
They get money from the federal taxpayers. Federal taxpayers are subsidizing single-parent homes through these incentive payments. And so they have actually
the incentive payments, and I'm pretty sure that's what he's talking about, but states have. So the interesting thing about child support is technically for a state, you don't have to have a child support program. Texas can wake up tomorrow and say, hey, we don't want the federal child support program here. The federal government will say, that's fine. You don't have to comply with what we're telling you. But then you also don't get welfare monies to be able to give out to the people that live in Texas that are below the poverty line. And I'll hear a lot of people say this. They'll say, well, why are you guys wondering about Trump and any of these people helping out family law? You know, that's a states' rights issue. That's a states' rights issue. That's not federal. But it's not exactly true, because the federal government uses this carrot stick approach that then influences every state to change their family law guidelines to comply with what the federal government wants. And basically every state is kind of threatened with orphans and homelessness, kind of being swamped with that if they don't do what the federal government wants them to do in regards to child support. So if they give that up, then they're not going to receive their welfare stipends basically from the federal government that then allows them to give out that money for their individual state welfare program. And the incentive payments that he's talking about are a little different in the sense of like, so let's say in California every year, I don't even know, I'm just going to pull a number. Let's say you have like, I don't know, 20,000 babies being born. I have no idea what it really is. And let's say 44% of these babies are born out of wedlock, meaning that the baby isn't born in the world with a father attached to it legally, just off rip, right? California is going to receive an incentive payment, meaning it'll get more money to use on welfare, more money for the budget for child support program, if it's able to establish paternity for all these kids. So if by the end of that year, they're able to say, look, 44% of these 20,000 kids, I guess, I don't know, 8,800 of these kids were born without dads, and we found a dad for each of these kids. Now, that doesn't mean we found the dad. That just means we found a dad legally. So the child support agency wants to be able to go back to the federal government at the end of the year and say, hey, look, we were able to establish 99.99% of these kids' fathers. And that's called a federal performance measure. And there's 5 of them that are outlined in you know, the Social Security federal laws, which are then, you know, adopted by all these different child support agencies, and that's what they work towards. And if they can kind of go back with good marks, they can receive these incentive payments, which is a little bit higher than they otherwise would have got. And if they do bad, the federal government basically says, well, we're going to dock how much you're getting for welfare this year because you guys didn't do a good job. So they have these huge incentives to try to really use the system to kind of just throw it on you and get you into the system, because they're trying to up their performance numbers on that. Yo, Philip, welcome in, man. Good to see you, Theron. Nice, man, on the YouTube. Hey, dude, have a good stream. I'm heading out, but damn, it is good to hear someone who knows shit to talk about shit. Yo, thank you, man. I appreciate you coming in here and saying hi, bro. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day there. You have a beautiful Saturday evening. Man, we gotta hit some of that Super Mario Maker soon. So thanks again for coming in and saying hi. You have a great rest of your day. All right. Anyways, yeah. Oh, yeah. And then, so when it comes to things like federal laws, right? Like when it comes to things like custody, there is like federal passed custody acts, basically, like uniform measures. And most states, I think all states, have adopted the ones on custody. And that gives a set of guidelines of how states need to, you know, interact with custody. And a lot of them adopt that into their state guideline, or state codes, family law codes. And if they don't, again, they're going to lose money on welfare. So both child support and custody, to some extent, is kind of under this carrot stick approach from the federal government. So when people are like, well, why do you expect the president or, you know, Congress to do something about this? It's because their influence has drastically changed how all states handle family law. For sure. Talk later. Awesome, man. Again, thanks for coming in. It's crazy. I was just thinking about you. So I remember when we played games last time, and I was like, I wonder how he's doing. But glad to hear you're doing good, man. If anyone is interested, those federal performance measures are public. They are, yeah. You can find that on the social SSA.gov, the Social Security website. Yeah. So, man, let's see if I can remember it off the top of my head. It's been a while. There's paternity establishment. There's child support collections per month. Child support collections on back pay. Was health insurance orders one of them? And then there's cost effectiveness, I believe, also. So how much child support did you collect per dollar spent from the agency to collect it? I don't know if health insurance was one or not. That one could be not factual, but I know the other four are. So yeah. Anyways, getting back to it.
A financial pecuniary incentive to make the fatherhood crisis as bad as possible. States don't make money on child support.
Oh, it was order establishment. Order establishment. That was the other.
Unless there's fatherless children. So they talk on the one hand about
paternity.
The crisis of fatherhood, but then they have to blame the fathers so that they can claim that the only solution is child support enforcement, and they can fill their coffers. I mean, the great example of this is Josh Hawley, who came out with this ridiculous book. Which has sold, I don't know, millions of copies about, men manning up and all this, these silly phrases. And Josh Hawley was the Attorney General of Missouri. Well, the Attorney General is the main, it's the most crooked office in America, in my opinion.
Health Insurance one.
And anybody who's Attorney General of an American state knows that the Attorney General, his job is to pull in as much revenue as possible from the federal government through child support enforcement. So on the one hand, he's urging men to marry, have children. And then when you do that, when you marry and have children, and your children are taken away from you by the family court, he can present you with a child support bill, and he can fill the coffers of the state with your children's patrimony. So this is unbelievably cynical. I mean, the devil, I don't know if you believe in a personal devil or not, but, a little red man with a cloven foot sitting there with a T-square couldn't come up with a more diabolical, evil system.
Another thing about child support, too, is, like, the thing that is, I guess, most annoying to me is that, it used to... Child support and things like that worked one way for families that weren't in the welfare system, and it worked another way for families that were in the welfare system. And there was this divide between public family law and private family law. And what happened, I think it was in the mid to late 80s, I might have been the OBRA, Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act. I can't remember exactly which one it was. But what happened there was that incentivized child support agencies to start advertising their services to people who were not in the welfare program. So originally, federal child support agencies only worked cases with people who were receiving federal welfare funds, right? Because the federal government issues money for states' welfare programs, and then that money goes out to the individuals living on welfare. And the child support program really was meant to try to get that money back from them, specifically the quote-unquote deadbeat dads, right? And then in the 80s, they changed that to have those agencies start to advertise their services and take cases from families who were not on welfare. Now we're talking about normal American middle-class families, And there was this sort of invasion from public family law into the private family law sphere. And now that's been pushed to such a degree that it's like, if you have nothing to do with welfare, public family law and this kind of haphazard way that it deals with this stuff intrudes into the lives of private citizens where before it didn't really do that. You know what I mean? And most of our state codes have been transformed by federal expectations for what child support should look like, which is kind of based off of, this reaction to welfare. Essentially, it's just the enforcement arm of welfare is what it is. But yeah, so that's the That's the damn shame of it. And what they never expect. I think when this started, people thought like, oh well, yeah. I mean, make it rough because it's just for those people on the other side of those of the railroad tracks. Those people who just can't get it together, not like us. You know what I mean? And then it grew so powerful that it came back, and now it just affects the lives of like a normal person. You know, now if you're Tyrese Gibson, child support, the welfare form of child support law is going to come and get you. You know, that's how we got some amazing music created by Tyrese Gibson discussing his travails, if that's a correct word, with child support. And or if you're, who's that guy in The Mummy that I liked? Brendan Fraser, you know, or if you're just a normal middle class guy. But yeah, so that's just kind of how it went down. and that's the part that annoys me a lot. I like Josh Hawley. So frustrating that he's not pragmatic. You know, truth, I never heard about him. I'll have to look him up. You aren't wrong. Thank you, Robert. Yeah, so that's how we got here.
Of child support enforcement and child support financing.
There's a paper I read that's called "Questioning Child Support Enforcement for Poor Families." I forgot when it was written. I think it was written in like 2007. And man, this paper is crazy. It's an academic paper. This is Princeton and Columbia, I believe. And was that Sarah McLanahan? I think that's who wrote it. I can't remember exactly. And man, it just shows over time that what it showed was that families that are, you know, poor essentially, without the child support system even involved, those kids typically receive more money from their dads. But when the child support system gets involved, it really just kills the relationship between like that poor child and his father. You know what I mean? Because when they get involved and they just screw this guy over, the dad just throws his hands up and he's just done with it. And over time, those families end up getting less money. You know, it's like, here's an interesting thing, right? It's like, what incentive would the child support program have to go after middle-class families? I'll tell you what it is. It's easier to collect dollars from middle-class and upper-class people because they have above-the-ground jobs. So all you got to do is send a wage assignment to them. But when it comes to collecting money from, you know, Pookie and whoever the hell, the rest of these guys, I don't want to just throw it on Pookie. You know what I'm saying? The bad boys. It's nuts. It's like trying to get blood from a turnip. So you have this welfare money going out. Sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't. But typically for those cases, you're not going to get anything. The debt's just going to go up, and they don't care because, you know, they don't play by the rules. But then by having child support go after middle class families, child support could come at the end of the year and say, look how much money we collected. But most of that money is just coming from middle class and wealthier people who are just doing what they're supposed to do, being good, hardworking citizens. So, you know, here we are.
It's designed to make the fatherhood crisis as horrible as possible. And that's what it does year after year after year. And this is why it only gets worse. It never gets better. And all these politicians and journalists can fall over themselves profiting from this. And there's not a prayer that the problem is going to improve. And they're making it worse.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more because, yeah, again, I speak to politicians frequently, and it's funny you're talking about attorney generals. On my radio show that I do, we just interviewed one of the candidates for running for attorney general in North Carolina. He didn't even want to go there, right, when I started bringing this up. And
it has to just be for votes, Robert. I think you're right. It's just like the immediate, I don't know, maybe it's just like they feel like as soon as they say something, it's just like they lose like half the voting power from the women or something.
And I actually believe he agrees that something needs to be done. But to your very point, he doesn't want to, you know, upset the apple cart, right? He knows you're talking billions of dollars come into states every year. And so they're incentivized. And of course, most of them are attorneys. And there's that side of it too, where they're making, the last number I saw was around $4 billion a year just in attorney's fees for divorce and family court issues. And that's why, you know, I think that's my opinion.
That's another thing, man. Just as much money as it cost. Like when a couple's going through divorce, the amount, that was a thing I noticed just looking at orders coming across my desk, like looking at divorce judgments. Because, you know, it would have in there sometimes how much the attorney's fees was and, you know, how much they'd have to pay. typically the guy would be ordered to pay his ex-wife's attorney's fees sometimes too. And man, like there goes Junior's nest egg. You know what I mean? Like building generational wealth is very tough, very, very tough here. And there's a lot of pitfalls that can happen that kind of juice that nest egg. And, you know, if the attorneys are mostly going to get it, especially if you're trying to fight for custody and things like that. But if you manage to, you know, if the divorce isn't that contentious, maybe, hey, it's not, that's great. Then you still got to look at what kind of happens though. Like you go from living in one house with one set of bills and now there's two households with two sets of bills, right? So all that extra money that's leaking out of essentially your family's wealth pool, is all money that could have been saved to then go to help and kick off the lives of the kids, whether it's their college tuition or helping out with their marriages or helping them buy their first homes and things like that. But you know, I think it's like a two-pronged problem. Like there's that, and then there's also like, you know, we've lived through a unique economic boom. Not us, but like the boomers and stuff. And you can be 18 and just go get a job, and now you can afford your apartment and thing. And it's like, hey, you're 18. It's time to go. Go figure it out. Get a job go down to the docks, do something. I don't know. And, you know, people would figure it out. They'd have enough money for the family, the kids, the retirement. But, you know, we're unfortunately not living in the same kind of economy as back then, coupled with all this family law stuff, you know, kind of juicing people's inheritance. And it's just, you know, I think people forgot how to save money for their family and spend family wealth on moves that make sense for perpetuating the family forward. And you know, people from 100 years ago knew how to do this because they didn't live with such extravagant wealth, and they knew to keep the family going, these are the things you have to do. But then, you know, I think that sort of wealth boom came in the 50s. We kind of forgot a lot about that, and we have all these other changes. That was, I don't know, it was just something I think about. Like generational wealth is so tough, and now we got other problems. Like most of us are going to have to figure out what to do in our old age, just taking care of ourselves as far as retirement goes. I was watching a Legion of Men video where he was reacting to this news thing about retirement and Gen X coming up towards retirement now, and how, you know, a lot of them, you'd need like over $1 million to be able to retire, and most of them got like 150,000. Well, some of them have 150,000. I think like half or something. I don't know, which just wasn't looking good. Oh, let's not even think about hourly fees. In the court order, if the court order isn't clear. Yeah, oh my God. You know what used to get on my nerves, man? Like when people sometimes attorneys would call me while I was at my desk at child support, and they would ask me stupid questions on purpose. Like, you're talking about a family law attorney that's been in the game for a long time, and they would purposely tell me things that I know had no bearing on the case. And I knew why they were doing it. They were doing it so that they can just bill their clients more for having a conversation with me about complete BS. And it's like, I could try to like get the phone call to end, but at the same time, I do have to provide good customer service. Otherwise, I'd get a conversation. So, you know, if they got questions, you got to answer it. But I couldn't exactly be like, I guess, kind of too stern about it. Otherwise, they would, you know, people would complain. But I knew what they were doing. It's like, I've seen like these people's history. They've been working on family law cases for years. You're going to ask me these basic questions that you know the answer to, or sit here and go on a huge rant about what the other side has been talking about and doing in their moral character. Like, you know, that doesn't matter for us. And they're doing it so that they can call up the client later and be like, yeah, I worked on your case. I was on the phone with them for like an hour. And by the way, that's going to be $500. Complete scam. I think a lot of attorneys write orders badly on purpose for future billable hours. Man, there are so many cases I saw where I remember thinking, like, if this guy didn't hire an attorney, and if he just lied down, if he just planked the bench at the court and did nothing, the same outcome would have happened to him anyways, and he would have just saved the money he spent on an attorney. Oh.
They don't do anything about it. But, you know, when you look at society's ills now, especially the issues that you see with men's mental health crisis and stuff like that, and how they completely ignore it, right? I mean, 100+ men unalive themselves every single day. And
man, 100 a day, that's very, very terrible.
Yeah, you mentioned, for example, trans rights, and I don't want to go down that alley. People have different opinions on it, but one of the arguments they'll often make is, well, we don't want them to kill themselves. Okay, valid argument. I'll agree with you there. But a lot more men are killing themselves every single day, and you don't want to have that discussion. Why?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing, because prior to no-fault divorce, I think what a lot of like progressives and feminists will say, well, you know, there were women who would harm themselves and pull the ripcord because they were stuck in abusive marriages, and so now less women are victims to domestic violence because of that, and domestic related deletions, and that's true. But at the same time, it's like deletions with men has increased so wildly, but no one wants to have that conversation, like, genuinely, other than men just need to try harder and get their mental health up or whatever.
Your thoughts on that? Why is that side?
You know what helps mental health? Taking off a lot of pressures that you have on you. Like when you take off expectations, you're just like, oh, I feel better now. And then so it's like but they don't want to do that for you. They want to keep the high expectations on you. They do want to pressure you and all that. But then they want you to make your mental health better. And it's like, I feel like once you hit a certain point, you just got to choose for the sake of your own sanity, you know?
No, we're worried about, I don't know what the number is, a number of people that might commit suicide as trans, which is awful, all right? I don't want anyone doing that. But it's dwarfed by the number of men every single day. We're talking thousands a year, and they don't want to have that discussion. And again, it gets back to the question. I understand the money side of it is, but something like men's mental health, they won't even address that. What's your thoughts on that?
You stated it very well. I don't know if I have anything to add to it. It's amazing. Yeah, I quote a number of scholars. There's a scholar, Augustine Kaposova, who wrote about this 15, 20 years ago, about men's suicide. He linked it directly to family court. I remember his study. It's very good. And then the media reported on it. And they completely lost it. I mean, he said he basically argued that it was the suicides were directly related to judgments from the family court. I mean, you take away a man's children, you take away his income, you throw him out of his home, you accuse him of crimes, you threaten him with prison, you turn him out on the street to a life of homelessness, and you wonder why they're killing themselves. Well, the media. It's pretty obvious, but then the media reported Kaposova's finding, and they said, well, it's because men aren't getting in touch with their feelings.
That's interesting right there, too. I don't know what I think I might have missed the stat, but how many men who kind of end up doing that to themselves, how many of them had some contact with the family law system over the course of their lives? And, I mean, that was always a concern at the child support office. Well, I don't know, not so much about men's mental health, but more so a domestic violence occurring on the case. So a lot of the times if there was a worry for that, we would have to mark the case specially so that most time the woman's, like 90% of the time, maybe for men sometimes, but most of the time. So typically when we'd file court docs, sometimes both parties' addresses would be on the documents and both parties would receive a copy of that. So both parties could see where the other's residence address was. And, if they asked, we would do something in the system that would redact that information to try to prevent domestic violence, which was a thing that would occur. There were some kind of legends around the office about some bad things that had happened.
Yeah.
So they just trivialize it like that, and they say, well, the solution is obviously that men need more psychotherapy, more feminist therapists to sit on the couch and with them and talk about get in touch with their feelings. I mean, it's ludicrous. But it's been going on for 20 years that I know of.
Yeah, I mean, to your point on the therapy side of it, something in the neighborhood, last study I saw, about 40% of suicides are men dealing with divorce/family court.
That would be interesting. I mean, I don't know if that's true. That's a large number. 40% of men who are doing that to themselves, pulling the game over, is 40% is linked to the family court. That would be pretty high. Maybe what it is that they have over the course of their lives had some involvement with the family court in one way or the other. I mean, there was a study I actually referenced. This was the video I made on Ben Shapiro talking about the red pill. He had quoted some study about, I think it was like men's, I don't know what it was, drug use or something. Deaths from drug overdose, and he said it was worse for men who weren't married or something. And I found a study that basically discussed, I mean, I don't know why he went from what drug overdose, because I think I found a study that was just about men, calling it quits, you know what I'm saying? Hitting the game over button. And it broke it up into groups. There were men who were married, there were men who were single, but never married, and then there were men who were single and divorced, and I think there was some other one. But typically men were happiest who were married, but it wasn't like that different from it was a little bit more than men who were single but never married. But then, so men who had the highest likelihood of calling it quits, deleting was men who had been divorced. And if you looked at the men who were never married, their likelihood to do that was much less. It was not that different from the guys who were married and not divorced. You know what I mean? So the study basically says, if you get married and you get divorced, you have a much higher likelihood of calling it quits. You know what I'm saying? But if you're just single and never married, it still remains, it's slightly higher than the guy who's married, but it's not that much higher, which I thought was pretty interesting, And it was also interesting that Ben Shapiro chose to avoid that study. It was from a reputable institution. I think it was UC San Diego or Riverside. I couldn't remember which one it was. San Diego, I think. Because that would kind of destroy his argument. You know what I mean? So it was very interesting.
Shortly thereafter, when the family breaks apart, they're dealing with it. That's when it occurs. And, you figure, let's say it's 100 men a day that are committing suicide, and 40%, that's 40 a day just because of family court. And you might quibble on some of those arguments. I actually think it's probably a higher number than that, but that's just my opinion. I have no data to support it. But
it's tough to say it's because, I'm sure it is somewhat, that's giving a huge causation. I would say that's probably more correlation in the sense that a lot of those guys had some involvement in a family law court at one time in their lives. Was it because of that? Maybe, people losing their families and destroying their families and destroying something that they worked on for years and then losing custody and all that stuff. And then feeling like it's completely your fault, and being gaslit from society that it's completely your fault probably has something to do with that.
It goes back to where we are as a society. And that's one of the things I wanted to explore with you is, seeing all of this over the last few decades and looking at where we are as society and seeing men withdraw from it. This is something I wanted to explore with you because you've written about it in several of your books. I think that train is now really starting to speed down the track. Men have abandoned relationships, abandoned marriage. They're flat out withdrawing from society. I actually, one of the things I've brought up many times is I think one of the biggest effects we're going to see from the pandemic is that men realized that they can do okay alone, so they don't need relationships as much, but it also exacerbated with men's mental health illnesses. And I think it's only going to get worse. I just wanted to get some thoughts from you on how that's all gone down over the decades and where we're at now. Do you see the same things?
Yeah, I do. I don't see things are much different on that. My argument now.
If I didn't have kids, the great sleep would have been much more attractive. Well, I can see that, especially if you go through a divorce and stuff like that. One thing, ideally, that would keep you going through such hardship would be thinking about your children, and making sure. That's just that's what every good parent, I think, maybe even bad parent. Any parent's going to probably have that huge instinct to want to be there for their kids. But yeah, I think when you get to a mental frame that's like that, it's almost not you who wants to do it. It's like this unconscious part of you. It's like you're looking at yourself from a third party perspective, and your body is just wants to do that. You know what I mean? Sadly. And it is a tough fight for those people because they probably rationally don't want to, but the other hemisphere of their brain or something is like autonomously kind of pulling you in that way until it just becomes too much. You know what I mean?
Is that in many ways what we're seeing in the last 4 years or so is that this is reaching a crisis not only for men, but for the entire society, and that the whole.
It's definitely reaching crisis proportions, and I don't know. I guess I'm feeling negative today about the future, which I hate to be like that, but there is probably some tough times coming. Folks really need to have a plan and to think about what you're going to do, especially as you get older. And it kind of makes me think about the future. Looking at that article on Legion of Men's channel about the Gen X and retirement and their kind of lack of preparation for that. I can almost see how like the U.S. would slide towards more socialist programs, because as Gen X starts to try to retire, and if they're having like horrible time with that, those are all voters right there. Older voters are kind of passing away. Younger voters are coming up, and if they can't retire and they can't do that, I mean, I could see how it would become more attractive for them to vote in a certain way that essentially finds a way to give them more money to survive. I don't know. I mean, I think, God willing, I am blessed with some more life here, but I will be very fascinated to see which direction the country goes in the next, 20, 30 years. And also what the price of Bitcoin will be in 25 years. If I was in a coma and I woke up from that coma in like 20 years, the first thing I'd say to the doctor would be like, what is the price of Bitcoin? With my luck, it would be the exact same as today, which would mean that it's less because the dollar would probably be worth less too.
The fatherlessness phenomenon is responsible not only for our social ills, but also for our political ills. And then a lot of this takeover of the U.S. government, basically, over the last 4 years, since the election of 2020, and even before that, since the COVID crisis in early 2020, a lot of this is directly connected with the breakdown of the family and the family court, and the machinery that is being used to go after fathers is now being used to go after people like Donald Trump and the January 6th defendants and many other people like this. So in that sense, it's not getting any better. It's getting much worse. But it may also be getting worse in such a way that the larger society starts to have reasons to pay attention to it. That they might start to sit up and say, look, this doesn't just affect a few men on the margins of society. This is affecting everybody, and this is affecting our, the mainstream, the politics of our society. I mean, I hate to come up with a theory of immiseration, this idea that worse is better because everybody's going to realize how awful things are and they're going to finally wake up. But I don't see anything else, any other way to wake people.
Man, that coming from a PhD, and he kind of feels the same way. It's well, I was hoping that maybe it's not the most cheery-eyed view of the future, but I have to kind of agree with them. It'll probably get pretty bad. If we're in a plane, we're going to be flying through some heavy turbulence. And hopefully they start to see that and change things.
Yes, because the media won't do it. Even the alternative. Get back to our discussion of the media. I wanted to say, that shows like this are terribly important because the alternative media is the only voice out there that is speaking on this stuff. But even the alternative media, is not doing so in the same way that you're doing with this show. So, I would like to see Tucker Carlson, for example, take this on a little more forthrightly. Or some of the other, I listened to some excellent shows. I'm very interested in the war in Ukraine. I listen to a lot of good shows, very good shows, and analyzing the reasons for the war in Ukraine. And many of the commentators there complain about the blackout. They say there's a blackout. All you get is one side of the Ukraine war. All you get is one kind of opinion.
Oh, like a media blackout. I mean, it's crazy. I kind of noticed this on the apps too. Reddit was like the first place I've noticed it, where it's just like, it's almost obvious how biased everything is, and there's so many bots posting things. There's certain things that can't be posted. It seems like that kind of earlier golden era of the internet has been kind of supplanted now by the, I don't even know what word I'd use, the technocracy, and they have a pretty good handle on sort of the internet, and it's been put into the hands of a few powerful. In the Ukraine war was very much something like that. I mean, if you dig far enough, you can see a competing narrative, but it tends to just be, the good guys are winning, and that's it. The good guys are winning. That's all you got to know. Men withdrawing from society has other consequences too. Armies are going to have a hard time recruiting forces too. Yeah. Yeah, that's a whole nother aspect of that, especially, when it comes to draft and things like that. The only X factor I could think of is technology, and I would try to pay attention to different conflicts that go on around the world and see what I can find. And the way war is, you're always going to need boots on the ground and stuff like that, especially for holding territory. But, you got drones. Drones are such a huge part of it now. And it's just immediately obvious that war has changed. But you know what I mean? Like, yeah, but they can probably draft people, but getting guys to want to go is a different thing. I mean, I think people are more likely to go when they feel invested in the society, or they feel some kind of pride and all this kind of thing. But yeah, I mean that is going to be a huge problem. Hopefully technology can come in and save some of that. I mean, maybe we can get some of the gamers out there to pilot some of these drones and all these kinds of things, but we'll have to see about that.
They complain that there's a complete blackout about the fault of the U.S. Behind the war in Ukraine and what we've done to cause it and so forth. And I want to say to them, yes, you're right, there is a media blackout on that. But this media blackout has been going on about fathers has been going on a lot longer. It's probably the media blackout that served as the blueprint for all the others. It's probably the one that it was the first media blackout by the mainstream media.
This concept of media blackout is interesting, because it's like the way we do media blackouts over here is not obvious. It's just like throwing a bunch of information. It's just about drowning the other side's information with, the mainstream information, so that you don't see the other side. You know what I mean? It's not like an obvious blackout. It's more of just like a drowning of information, so that you don't really see the other thing. And the reason I think that is because I went to Pakistan for the first time in 2017. And I was there for a little bit of time, but there were protests going on there that were pretty upset. And I remember seeing a full-on media blackout. Like, I remember looking at the TV, and the TV is black. In fact, all you see was like ads on the corners. And I was like, wow, that's very different from what I'm used to in the United States. Like, I would never imagine seeing something like that in the US, but that was a media blackout. Over here, the only way I can see anything like that is like when the Ukraine war started, like the pro-Ukraine stuff drowned out everything, and the way they classify certain things, it's just like you're not going to see sort of the other side of it. And even if the other side's winning, like, you probably wouldn't know that, because you're seeing so much pro of whatever our side is. It really is indoctrinating it. But it's interesting that he calls that a blackout instead of like an actual blackout. But I don't disagree with him. I mean, they have such control over the currents of information. Yo, Mr. Pitt, welcome in. Great to see you. You know, Mr. Pitt, I always think about you when I'm looking at stuff online, and I always go on Amazon and I look at Gundam model kits. So one time I talked about maybe doing the model kit on stream, and so ever since then, because you mentioned, I think it was you who mentioned building a Gundam, and I was like, maybe I'll find a Gundam for Mr. Pitt. And then, like, I never pulled the trigger on it because I'm like, man, if I do a stream where I'm building a Gundam and, like, midway through it's too hard and I give up, I'll be like, man, why did I sign up for this? You know, it's like 3 hours later and I'm nowhere close to being done. But I still have them recommended to me on Amazon. I still think about getting them just so I could do a stream for that. Do you think the men with nothing to lose would ever go full Arab Spring? If so, to what end? Oh, man, that's a good question. I think the closest thing that I can think about a contemporary version of that right now is kind of what's going on in the UK, where you've seen a lot of the, well, I guess what would be dubbed far-right people coming out against immigration. That's one thing. I don't know if it's just immigration, but it is, they're probably disillusioned in many other ways. You know, obviously people who are winning in society are probably not concerned enough to come out on the streets. You know, part of me would like to think so, man, but the negative part of me doesn't think so, because it just seems like the ability to put down a, you know, kind of uprising like that, I just think is too great. I mean, we got a pretty militarized police force. You know, the National Guard will be out here. I guess the last time I can remember unrest was probably like George Floyd, you know, protests. And it's like, you know, everything is so contentious. It's like if I say protest, I can already hallucinate the other side's characterization as riots. Like either you're on this side and they call them riots, or you're on that side and they call them protests. But whatever, let's leave all that aside. I do think people would come out, but it seems like every time that happens, there's a lack of leadership. And what happens is those movements and that energy just gets hijacked. That kind of happened with Occupy Wall Street. That fizzled out. It seemed like that even kind of happened with BLM a little bit. The Arab Springs in itself, that happened. I mean, like in Egypt, I think there was a genuine Arab Spring. Could be CIA facilitated for all I know. If you read about the history of the Middle East and all the CIA involvement of dumping governments and getting rid of elected leaders for CIA-backed people is quite interesting. So things are the same over there. But eventually that just kind of got hijacked, you know, again. And the tough part about that is the sort of leadership that needs to be there for that usually isn't. And then when something like that happens, it just kind of, it doesn't seem like it's successful. It could happen. I don't know. You know, I mean, I think a lot of people are trying to leave or become passport bros or not. Some people are just so concerned with trying to make it month to month. Maybe after some time with the right leadership. I think what you see though is like, I don't know, when I think of like Elon Musk's Twitter, that's like one place where I see things fomenting. Like you can see the anger on there, and those people have a place to talk. So if anybody's going to do that, it's going to start on Twitter first probably and then go out to the rest of it. But I don't want to say no because, you know, history probably proves me wrong on that. Though when something like that happens, it would probably be very bloody. But taking on the United States sort of technologically advanced tyranny, I mean, I hate to call it a tyranny, but you know, the technocracy would be very, very hard to do. I'd be interested in hearing your opinion on that too.
You know, if you want to look around and find out, you know, complain about media blackouts on your favorite issues, well, just look at what fathers have been going through for a quarter century, and you can see what, you know, the rehearsal, the dress rehearsal for all the rest of it.
If you ever do it, build the Strike Freedom. You know what? I'm gonna pull that up on a tab right now, just so I don't forget. Gundam Strike Freedom Model Kit. Oh man, that is a serious. Okay, there's two of them. One of them's $60, one of them's 160. There's probably just different scales. So if I got like a smaller scale, I think I could do it. Oh yeah, as another things in regards to this, like I can think of like two examples, I guess more recently. I don't know if you watch kind of the international news, but there was Bangladesh just had an uprising of young people, you know, and they have successfully ousted the government there. Though a lot of them did die, and there were, you know, military and police. The only reason they were successful is because military stood down, but the police in the beginning, you know, got rid of a lot of these students, like with weapons, but they were successful. Something similar, like a year ago, almost happened in Pakistan, but it didn't work, and that was they had a prime minister named Imran Khan, and he was ousted from power basically over what was essentially a leaked cable, leaked U.S. A cable between countries, and it was classified or something happened, but he got ousted. A lot of people came out and protested, and they didn't like that, and some people didn't make it. They were taken out. But that one failed, and I think the real difference between what made it and what didn't make it was just probably like background CIA involvement. And the folks in Bangladesh probably had, U.S. approval for a coup to happen, versus in Pakistan it did not, because they wanted that leader out because he wasn't aligned with U.S. interests and goals totally, where the ones that got put in after totally were. So a lot of times these kinds of things can be hijacked. In the U.S., I think it would be, maybe it would be different, But there's the Gundams.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to agree with you completely because it doesn't make for a great show, but I do, right? I think you're spot on. It became the blueprint.
Man, this conversation so far, I'm actually enjoying this conversation. Even with the audio the way it is, his audio's fine. He just needs a better mic, but that's okay. But this is actually a pretty good conversation.
What they did.
You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna subscribe to the channel. Men need to be heard. I'm surprised this only has it has such little views, 350 views, and I think it's a great interview. So I don't know, maybe check out the channel and support it if you can.
I mean, I'm 61 years old. I grew up with, men being painted as buffoons. I always talk about the Brady Bunch. The girls always beat the boys, and that was the start of it. And then it kept ballooning, and then Homer Simpson came along, and he became the definition of a father, and so on and so forth. And when you look back at things like, the media coverage and how Hollywood, the news media, all of that started portraying men and fathers, now you're seeing that happen politically, right? You kind of mentioned earlier that that's how they're painting the right. It's how they're painting Donald Trump. It's how they're painting the Ukraine war even, right? To take it away from a person, but to a thing. That's a blueprint that, and let's be honest, it's worked. I mean, we have to be honest about it. We may not like it, but it has worked. And I always say it has its roots going back 100, 150 years ago, because Marx talked about it. Goebbels did it. I mean, they find that book.
I'm not sure if he means Goebbels, which was Hitler's propaganda minister. I can't remember. Joseph Goebbels was his name. I think that's who he meant.
Boogeyman, and men became the boogeyman first, and now you're seeing them just use that blueprint over and over again. But to get back to some of the points we've been making, is society is breaking down because of it. And I wonder, do they really, they being the government, for example, do they really think that this is going to work to their benefit? I mean, I know they think they're going to get power and retain it and all that, but as we're filming this, it's a few days after Trump was convicted, and the anger that's coming out. Forget the right. You're seeing it from the center now, right? And I think that also is a blueprint. What you see happen to Donald Trump is what's been happening to fathers for decades.
Yes, very much.
Kind of an interesting way to put it. Maybe just being silenced or just being legally having your feet cut just legally everywhere you go.
How are they not? Are they really that blind? Do you?
Well, yes, I mean, they are that blind, and they have incentives to be that blind. I've been making this point too.
Essentially the traditional role of the father has been, destroyed, basically, right? It's just been reduced to a kind of servitude or just duties and responsibilities, but obviously not so much authority. So you as the dad, you don't have the authority that you think you do. Like the state has it first and foremost. Okay, fine, but it's just you in between your wife and over the kids, it's like if there's a disagreement, she can just leave and that's it. You as the father don't have like the final say. You're not the true head of the household in that sense. You guys are partners. Coach did an interesting stream, Coach Greg Adams, one of my heroes, about the word partner and about how the word partner came from the LGBTQ community and then kind of got exported to the rest of society, now using that in their language when they discuss relationships. And it would make sense because, LGBTQ, as they got marriage and stuff like that or whatever legal capacity to do it, they are operating outside of a traditional roles, and they have to figure out who does what roles in their relationships. And the word partner seems to make sense, especially for a relationship like that, instead of, I don't know, husband and wife, because of the nature of what it is. And that sort of took over the culture in a sense. And now, women or people say, well, yeah, he's my partner, or we're partners. This is my partner. It's not like this is my husband or this is my wife or whatever it is. And that is just yet another signal of the traditional roles being destroyed, right? So people come into relationships differently now. And they almost have to, because if you take the traditional role, that's how you kind of end up with the stuff he's talking about. And you end up very vulnerable to the system. You almost have to make it like the only guard against that is if you have them come into the marriage with some kind of money or some decent income or whatever it is. But the provider role is taken over, and your authority over that isn't there. In my honest opinion, I think the disenfranchised men would remain in a perpetual state of dissatisfaction. Yeah, so it sounds like you're saying that they wouldn't. Oh man, the third. Oh, okay. I'm waiting for your third one. Well, I mean, the system is so efficient. The system is so well put together. It's almost like 1984. That it's hard to do that, and it would take a very large amount of effort and leadership and collective action to be able to get something changed on that scale. It is the cards are definitely stacked against us in that regard. Occasionally they'll organize into groups and call attention to themselves, but it would rarely result in demonstrations or violence. Yeah, and I'd be interested to think why you think that is too. I mean, I agree with you. But what is it that so efficiently just takes that down and makes it not possible? Because it's like women organize collectively, especially for feminism, and things like that. And it's like men on the other side need to work together. And it's like, is it inherent in men to be way too competitive, even with each other, when it comes to this kind of thing? You're right in saying, maybe answer that right. You're right in saying the militarized police force is potent enough to put down any uprisings that they might attempt. Yeah, you would definitely need the buy-in of that, in order to do anything. And the sad part is it just sounds very violent, unfortunately. You know what I mean? And I try to look at the system and think, how can this legally be changed or guarded against? But that's kind of why we're in our situation now. I mean, I don't know. I just think people who are proponents of the traditional system and think it's coming back are kind of just chasing a pipe dream. and expectations need to change. I mean, again, like the way our economy works is just vastly different, unless it all goes down the toilet. But people of different strengths and skills can get jobs. You know what I mean? It's prior to that, women were really limited by their biology, and to some extent they still are. But technology and the way our economy functions and the type of jobs that are out there allow them to act outside of traditional behaviors, because there's essentially a way to do that. Now, a lot of that is subsidized by a welfare state. And if that wasn't there, then maybe even the economy and the way it was and technology the way it was, it'd probably still be tough. Simply put, in the West, even the most disenfranchised men have too much to lose: children, assets. Yeah, I mean, it's held hostage, basically. And this goes into questions about like legacy and things like that, you know, because it's like, how much control do you have over that? You know, whether it's the wife leaving you or whatever, and you having to fight for custody and not getting that much of it, or just the hive mind of the media kind of taking your kids anyways once they hit a certain age, and just the culture picking it up, you know, and kind of transforming them in a sense. And I do think a lot about what that looks like. Even if I had kids in the future, like how would I go about that and raising them, and what would the expectations that I put on them be? You know, what would be the advice I give a son or a daughter and all that? I just kind of settle on, like, if I was going to get married or have kids with somebody, it would be with women that have income or know how to work. And, you know, a lot of people don't like that because they'd be like, well, you know, they're not going to want to do this or do that. But for me, it's fine, because even the women who are single, stay-at-home moms, their divorce rate isn't that much different, and those ones are the most painful. But if they have a decent income and it's not that far off from your own, then at least be a little bit more manageable. But the question really is not just, you know, it's about transmitting your values. You know, like we were talking earlier about how hard generational wealth is to pass on, especially with all these freaking pitfalls, whether it's family law or whatever. Then it's about transmitting whatever your own values are, and that's tough in itself too nowadays, you know. But that's what it means to live, I guess, in a free society. It's all about stepping outside of bounds, things like that.
Media commentators, even those that express outrage about what happens to Donald Trump, and I'm thinking of people like Alan Dershowitz and Jonathan Turley, and these really very well respected and very knowledgeable experts on the legal system. And if you listen, and they're genuinely upset. I mean, they say this is a terrible travesty of justice, what's been going on to Donald Trump, and what's been going on with the the January 6th defendants before that, and the indictments that went on a year ago against Trump, and all of this. And they're very indignant. They're very upset with this. But if you listen closely to their spin, they are actually covering up more than they are revealing. Mm-hmm. What they want to do is they want to make it seem that what's happening to Trump is exceptional. It's unusual. Dershowitz says that if you're Donald Trump, you have no justice in New York. Right? He's very careful to say this. There's no justice for Donald Trump in New York. And of course, the truth is much bigger than that. The truth is there's no justice for any American in any court in the United States. I mean, that's the plain truth. This is.
Robert says, doesn't matter. Stay-at-home moms are just as willing to quit, I've noticed. Yeah, and that's something that I've understood too. I think that kind of, you know, that it's just more of a fantasy or a dream that they're kind of selling. And I mean, to be the people that I know who are married, even with the guys that do make more, I mean, I still see them shoulder a lot of household responsibilities anyways. Like, I don't think any sane human isn't going to help with the baby and stuff like that and clean things up as they go, or even with cooking. And I mean, if you're a guy and you're getting married in your 30s or whatever, it's like, what were you, 18 to 30, you're probably already used to cooking for yourself and cleaning up and doing these kinds of things. That's just part of your life already. So a woman can't really sell herself to me like on those attributes, I guess. Like, oh, I'm going to cook and clean and do all these things. And it's like, I'm kind of used to what the food I make for myself anyways, and all this kind of thing at this point. But yeah, I noticed that too. It's just single moms will jump off. That's just it. that's just not viable to me. You know, if anything, if you're gonna get married and do that and join assets, she should have some skin in the game, and the only way to do that is through her finances. Only way you can get me to marry a single mom is if, you know, that woman's dad or whoever, her father-in-law, is going to be like, Shah, you're amazing. I really want you in our family. Here's a dowry amount, in the amount of $350,000, and I'm giving that to you prior to signing the state marriage contract. So this is a gift or whatever. And I want my daughter to be a stay-at-home mom. I'm like, you know what, father-in-law, you're amazing, and I think you're a great example of a individual. And then, yeah, you know, and then if it goes south, I'll be like, well, you know, cost me a little bit of money, but at least I didn't go in here losing everything. I had some insurance on that. The craziest, but, you know, like the weirdest are women who are like 27, 30, and then they want to be stay-at-home moms, and it's like, especially if they're not bringing anything to the marriage. It's like, you're 18, you're 27, or you're 30 now. You went to college, you were working, and you saved zero money? Like, I mean, is marriage really on the table? You know, you want me to do everything? What were you doing from 18 to 27? Like, you didn't make no kind of money? Klaus says, only if women are not happy about how society works, there's going to be a change. I guess playing the long game is the way to go. MGTOW is hurting them the most. Yeah, I completely agree with that. You know, being Andrew Tate or whatever, great. Self-improvement's cool. But I think MGTOW has had the single greatest effect on anything to get people to even look our way. Because as we get money, and if we're not just giving away that money because society pressures us into doing that, or even if we're not making money and we're just like, you know what, I don't even need that much money. I don't need that much to survive as a single guy, and I'm just going to do that. It still affects them because they're not getting as much money from you tax-wise or whatever, you know. Men can be pretty simple sometimes, right? Like today was an amazing day. You know, I woke up, I ate some breakfast, I went outside, flew my drone. It was good. Went grocery shopping, bought some eggs and butter, and very basic things like that. And now I'm doing this, and it's amazing. You know what I mean? But yeah, I think that has the greatest effect, because when they get you to kind of buy in and get married and do all this stuff, you really become a consumer in the way that they want you to, and start powering the economy. So, and the only articles and news stuff that I hear is always about, oh, men aren't getting married. And it's essentially about the MGTOW guys to begin with. So unfortunately, I think that's what it is. I do credit the MGTOW guys a lot. And I think the huge positive is the education and just people sharing their experiences has been very good for men.
Not Donald Trump in a court in Manhattan or Donald Trump in a court in New York State. This is the breakdown of the judicial system throughout the United States. And then they turn around and they will say, if they can do this to Donald Trump, they can do this to any of us. And again, no, this is they get it exactly backwards. The point is they're doing this to Donald Trump because they've already done it to the rest.
That kind of makes me think of the Johnny Depp Amber Heard thing. You know, like so many men have been on the receiving end of, you know, what happened to Johnny Depp from Amber Heard, you know, in their own private lives that we never hear of. You know, the only reason we heard about it with Johnny Depp is because he had the money to fight against this, and it became so public because of who he was. And it's kind of the same with Trump too. It is true. Like, you know, the courts kind of do this as a matter of everyday practice, and we don't really take notice of it until someone high profile like that, it gets done to them.
They've already put the mechanisms in place. They've already established the practices. They've already created the corrupt judiciary that ordinary Americans have been suffering for years. Mm-hmm. Now they're applying it to the high politics of presidential elections and Donald Trump. So
that's exactly how I feel about child support, just in general. I mean, it started off, again, by them saying, hey, it's for the people on the other side of the railroad tracks who can't get it right. And then it's just crept in slowly and just started gutting the middle class. And now we're really starting to take note, like when you see it happen to celebrities. And it's like, what? it's completely designed in a way to disincentivize men from trying harder. And that was like one of the biggest takeaways I had from working there, is that the harder you work and the more successful you are, you're just like a bigger fish to fry. You're just more vulnerable to this system. And it's like someone who's extremely successful should be incentivized to the max to have as big as family as they possibly can. That should be almost the reward for being successful. But instead, it's like, no, just one kid, two kids will completely, take you down financially. And it's kind of backwards in a way. And then people are like, why is the birth rate so low?
It's not like this is the beginning of it and the rest of us can, expect to pay the price later. No, the rest of us have been paying the price for years. And the best example of that is family court. And now it's gotten to such an extreme state that it's actually what used to be yesterday was victimizing fathers in family court is today determining the outcome of presidential elections. So we're way past, the media pundits, even the ones that seem like the good guys who are saying all the right things. They're spinning it to protect, because I think about it, Dershowitz and Jonathan Turley and all of them are they're all members of the bar associations. I mean, they have no incentive to expose this. If they did, they would be canceled. They would be stripped of.
That's a good point. Also, just a lot of people kind of just toe the line, especially if you're a professional, a licensed professional, like an attorney, heck, even a doctor. Maybe you see this in medicine too, but with attorneys, it makes sense. Yeah, if you really go against the grain, you can get disbarred, and then that's it for your career.
They would be disbarred in no time at all, and they would be turned out on the street. So they have no incentive. The best commentary I heard the other day was by Robert Barnes. He's a little more iconoclastic than the others, and he admits that this is reflective of a larger corruption in the judiciary, not just Donald Trump and not just New York State, but a larger corruption of the judiciary. But even he didn't want to dwell on it. He said it in one sentence, and then he moved on to something else. So you can see the fear in the lawyers. It's easy to demonize lawyers and judges, but to some extent they are also prisoners of the system. They live in fear also. They're well-paid prisoners of the system. They're well remunerated for their cowardice, but they are also in fear, just like the rest of us.
Yeah, I like you mentioned
that's interesting thing too. And I think about it, yeah. I mean, judges and lawyers, they're essentially just operating within the legal system. It's not like they're all just making these tricks happen. You know what I mean? It's just the normal whatever's, the way that the system is designed. It's designed that way. And, it's true. Yeah, if they try to go against it, it's a great way to get disbarred.
Talk about this as a prediction for the future. I'm like, this is the culmination of the past.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't watch a lot of the trial. I was kind of keeping my distance from it. But the little bit I saw, I was kind of chuckling to myself, going, "This is family court every single day, and people don't know that."
Exactly. Exactly. Anybody who's been in family court
knows.
Pretty sure he's talking about the Stormy Daniels and all that stuff.
Trump is going through exactly. I mean, January 6th.
Same thing there, right? And. Again, it goes back to it was the blueprint, I think, and now we're seeing the quote unquote payoff of it. But it begs the question, because seeing the blowback that's occurred, as we're filming this, I saw this morning Trump's raised something like $200 million. I think in relating it back to men's and fathers issues, I think that there's this simmering thing going on that in Trump's case has now come up. And I have to say, I think it's somewhat hopeful to me that maybe this is going to be a turning point we'll look back on 20, 30 years from now, where men woke up, right? Because let's be honest, most of Trump's supporters are men by far compared to women.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I think they're starting to find their voice. And it kind of speaks to the average man, right? There's people like you and I have talked about the issues. It's not going to change who we are or what we've done. We've already been doing it. But seeing how the quote-unquote silent majority is starting to wake up, do you think that this brings some hope, or you think I'm crazy, that maybe this is going to be the start of men finally using their voices?
One thing because I've thought about, okay, if let's say men go MGTOW all the way and it starts to become a problem and they're not getting that buy-in from men. It's like, what happens next? What does the government do, or how does it get passed? And I think it'll go like one of two directions. Like maybe if we're lucky and we work together and things get changed in a positive manner that makes it even and incentivizes both parties to get married and do stuff like that. My other opinion is a little bit more pessimistic, and it comes from in 1975 when the federal child support program was created. Prior to that, there was another proposal, and it was called the Sugarman proposal. And I can't remember. There was a second guy too, but I can't remember his name. Oh well. Well, essentially what that proposal was to expand the Social Security program, and they were going to create a new tax on basically everybody's income. I don't know if it was just men or everybody back then. And it would essentially serve as insurance for if you ever became a father of a child out of wedlock. And if that happened, then the mom would go to Social Security and she would apply under this program, and that pool of funds would then create an amount given to her, basically, for that child that men have been paying into from their jobs. There was the Sugarman proposal, and then there was another one. There was pretty much exactly the same. One difference was that it would only apply for kids who had dads who paid into the system. The other one was it would just apply to all kids, whether or not their dad was employed or not, or paid into the system or not. And the other way, like if this goes this way and you have men that aren't buying into relationships or having kids or whatever, I can see them circling back and creating a system that kind of creates a tax that expands Social Security, kind of reminiscent of this proposal from before the child support system was made. And back then they didn't like that because they were like, screw that. We want to go after the deadbeat dad. Let's make the child support system, the federal one anyways. And, in the future, if you got guys basically holding on to their money and doing stuff, I can see them sort of expanding the reach of government to essentially put a tax. I guess you would call that more socialist in a sense. In expanding Social Security essentially to kind of get child support from us in that way. You know what I mean? Like that, it would be a way of spreading the child support burden onto everybody, even though you don't have kids. That's how they would get you. In a way to subsidize welfare anyways, right? So if men and women aren't coming together and women are out here just doing IVF treatments with sperm donors or, just sleeping with random guys or whatever, and a lot of us are left out of that, they will eventually come for the money somehow. So I wouldn't be surprised to see something like that.
Well, yes, I think there is. I do see a silver lining there. I think that is to some extent true. And the way the place you see that is the number of young black men who have been attracted to Trump lately. That's been a lot in the news lately. And of course, black men have been the victims of these injustices much longer than white middle class men.
Man, I think we talked about this on the last stream. But yeah, and when I say the people on the other side of railroad tracks, this system came down very hard on the black community first, and especially if you look at things like, the children being born out of wedlock rate for the black community is very high. So their involvement with this system happens at a greater rate because just right off top, I mean, if you got to establish paternity for these kids, 75% of these kids, that involves the public family law system to some extent, right? And if, just over the course of this whole interview, all this stuff they're talking about what the family law system does to men, then yes, I mean, there is a huge impact that it's had on the black community. And the part that the rest of America never thought would happen is that this same system would then come for them, and it has come for them. You know what I mean? And it's almost deserving in a way. I hate to say that when you kind of look at it in that sense, but it just grew too powerful.
In many ways, the whole family court machinery, the child support enforcement, domestic violence, child abuse, all of this was put in place for the welfare, under the welfare system.
There you go. See, and this is why I like Dr. Stephen Baskerville, because he's like one of the only other guys that really understands this. And this is, when I had the interview with Pearl, this was like one of the things I really wanted to put out there, was the difference between this public and private family law system. And I still haven't reacted to Coach's reaction to that. But that was one of the reasons I've been watching Coach for a while, but I was really impressed with Coach's reaction to my interview with Pearl, because he picked up on that. And that was something that I don't think a lot of people did, but that was something I wanted people to understand. And he understood it very clearly. And I was like, thank God somebody got it, and he understands it because he's read the history of all this stuff in the law. So it's very few people understand that.
That's where this was devised. And it's black men, minority men, low income men who have been much longer suffering with this, this emasculation, this,
I'm very happy that he's saying that, because it's true. I mean, that's how it started, then it began to creep into the middle class. Then it began to creep into the upper class. Now they're feeling the effects of it, but before they did not care, for a long time.
The confiscation of their children, the criminalization,
throwing them in jail
through either child support or various other mechanisms. They've been living with this much longer. And, they're the ones, if they can be attracted to Donald Trump, then I think that really does say something extremely important when you consider, that speech he gave the other day in the Bronx, and the way he's attracted men in a place like the Bronx is quite phenomenal. I think that there's a huge, who's this gentleman? I corresponded with him, Mark Fisher. You might talk to him. He would be a good man for the show.
Okay.
He's the BLM. He was a BLM leader in Baltimore, I think it was, Maryland. And he received some notoriety last summer because he endorsed Trump as a BLM leader. And I guess he's got a breakaway faction now of BLM. But he stood up and he spoke for himself, because when you think of the actual mainstream BLM, if you look at it, it's not men at all. It's run by feminists.
Yes.
And it was created by feminists, it's run by women, and some homosexual groups. And it's not surprising the black men, heterosexual men, are waking up and getting out of BLM. Mark Fisher was one of the most decisive.
That's the tough part about like any genuine movement, Mr. Pitt. I think you're asking kind of something along these lines earlier. Is when people do start to organize on a organic grassroots level, whatever the cause happens to be, the sort of big money interests come in and they try their best to hijack it, and we see this happen a lot. I think the one, obviously the one in our forefront is kind of the manosphere, the red pillars, or all the folks under the umbrella of the manosphere. The tradcons are trying to hijack that. You might even say they're successful in so many senses, but they are very obviously trying to get that faction of men in line under the sort of tradcon umbrella. You know what I mean? And that's just one of the issues, and it goes down to leadership, and it's tough. I can't say, well, you guys got to be better leaders or whatever. That's easy to say. The fact is most of us are just normal citizens, so understanding how the political machinery and stuff operates up there is kind of alien to us, and big money donors and lobbyists and think tanks and all these kinds of things. But they see this kind of stuff fomenting, and then they do their best to direct that energy where they want it to go. And sometimes it's not in the interest of the people that are participating in that in the first place. It's just like if the manosphere can really be a faction of men that plays both of the two parties, the two other sides against them, whether it's the tradcons or the progressives. I would like to see a manosphere that can parlay with both sides. I don't want them to just be under the thumb of the tradcons unless they're giving us something. You know what I mean? And if it's frankly, if it's the progressive side that's giving us something, then I would be open to that if it's something that's substantive. You know, if both sides put out a platform and one of them was just better, I would go with that one. And I would like to see them kind of fighting over us instead of them trying to cut our legs early, you know. Blexit. Man, I remember Blexit. Gosh, feels like so long ago now. When I hear that, I just think of like Candace Owens and Kanye from back then.
To do that. So
I forgot. Blexit was named after the I can't remember what the English sort of EU thing was called. Wasn't that a play on the exit of England from the European Union? I forgot what their buzzword term was.
I think there's some, and it's odd because it shows that really, one of the most powerless men.
It was Brexit, like Britain exiting or something, and then it became Blexit.
Sectors of our
society. That term was just used for that.
Is the black male? I mean, he's demonized by the right. He's demonized by the left. The Democrats despise him. The Republicans despise him. And yet, ironically, I think the black male has a lot of leverage right now. Mm-hmm. I think if black men were to come out en masse, and against Biden, first of all, and maybe and against the Democratic Party as having sold them out, and to be conditionally, and I emphasize conditional.
That's
start
right.
Supporting the Republican Party, but even make it clear to the Republicans that their vote cannot be taken for granted.
Yeah. See, and that I can agree with, because it's like if you vote on a group or you guys have a kind of collective issue, and you can get people to the only other way is like, okay, like that works, but you also have to be willing to not vote if they're not giving you at least a little bit of what you want. And it would be easier if, let's say, the group of men forms a bunch of red pill or manosphere guys form a voting bloc. This is called, I believe, wedge issue politics. And it's like, if we have a platform and we're like, these are our demands. Let's say we have 10 demands. And typically we vote for Republicans. Let's say most guys vote for Republicans. And if they're not going to at least, entertain 3 of those demands, some amount, then they don't get our votes. And that would put the fear of God into them, especially if we were vocal about it. Doesn't mean you have to vote for the other side. It just means they're staring down, the barrel of failure at that point. And they're like, what are we going to do? We have to do something. Otherwise, they're not going to vote for us. If the other side is smart, they'll be like, here's our platform. We're going to give you 5 of those things. Then, you can control politics at least a little bit in some way. You could have an influence on it. But most people just give away their votes for free. And there's not enough collective platform creation, in a sense. These are our demands. This is what we want to see. Or you're not getting our votes. That's pretty much our only power.
From the Republicans, if you want our vote, you've got to earn it. Mm-hmm. I think black men could have a lot of leverage right now in mainstream politics.
I think they've realized that. I've had several black men on this show talking about men's and boys issues, and in some regard, to the destruction of the black family. I mean, you go back to the early 60s, I don't remember the exact numbers, but something like 85 to 90% of black children were raised in 2-parent families. And now it's reversed almost exactly. And I think that, in speaking with black men, which I do frequently, I think you're right. I think they've realized.
My bad. I want to hear
now it's 90% to the early 60s.
Oh, yeah.
I don't remember the exact numbers, but something like 85 to 90% of black children were raised in 2-parent families.
That's what I
and
heard
now
too.
It's reversed almost exactly. And I think that, in speaking with black men, which I do frequently, I think you're right. I think they've realized that they do have a voice. And ultimately, they may be the ones that determine the election coming up. They're saying somewhere around 20% of the entire black population is now backing Trump / the Republicans, which is a huge turnaround, because it used to be 7, 6, 7, 8%. But again, it goes back to, I think it's bodes well for men and men's issues and boys' issues, because once they find that voice and, for lack of a better term, the courage to speak out, I think they're going to start seeing changes, and then it's going to snowball. Which brings me to the next thing I wanted to kind of talk to you about, which is, and you've talked about it in a couple of your books as well, the crisis of masculinity, right? We've emasculated men in my lifetime. As I said earlier, I'm 61 years old. I grew up when whatever wave number feminism you want to apply to it, second, third, fourth, I don't even know anymore, started really snowballing, and it was demonizing men to do so. But now we're at a point now where men, I argue, men don't know how to be men anymore. Hey fans, I just wanted to take a quick break.
Man, guys, subscribe to this channel. Men need to be heard. All right. Uh-oh. Oh.
Become part of the Men Need to Be Heard community. All right, that's it for now. Back to the show. Men, I argue, men don't know how to be men anymore, and I want to get some of your thoughts on that.
That's an interesting thing too. I think someone asked me earlier, or like a couple streams ago, like how do I define masculinity? And that's a tough thing to do, in itself. But I try to look at what people are selling out here, and it's like, one side's MGTOW, there's like the pickup stuff, and there's then there's like the Andrew Tate style. And I don't consider Andrew Tate masculine. I consider him hyper masculine, because he's selling a hyper masculinity as a thing guys should be aiming for. Of course it's not practical for most people. Coach Greg Adams again had another interesting point. I was listening to a show, and he mentioned something about the pickup community being I actually screen recorded that segment because I thought it was so interesting, and I'm gonna email it to myself right now, and we'll watch it together. But it about being snake charmers, like, pickup in a sense is just giving you strategies to kind of charm the snake. They're still snakes, you know what I mean? And he's like, I'm not telling you to do any of that stuff, you know what I mean? So it was just it's an interesting way to look at it, because being hyper masculine, being an Andrew Tate, is more about appeasing that, and just working with typical markers of attraction and taking it to the extreme to try to get over this. But at the same time, it's just it's not practical. Crap, my computer is waking out. Let me just give it a second. There we go. If this stream crashes, I'll write something in the chat, and then I'll make sure to get it back up. I'll give it a second. We'll just go back to watching this. Once the video comes in, we'll watch it together. But it was a great clip from Coach.
Well, yeah, very true. I mean, I talked about this in my new book quite a lot. The final chapter is is called Emasculated America. And
Emasculated America.
I discussed this phenomenon in some detail, and it is very serious, and it manifests itself in a number of different ways. Again, this is an old theme in African American literature. You go back to Richard Wright and James Baldwin and Ralph Ellison. They were talking about emasculation, decades ago. So there again, it started in the Black community to some extent, and the emasculation of low-income men. Now, more recently, the emasculation of middle-class men, and the loss of especially of their children. I mean, there's nothing more emasculating than that. That's the most tangible, measurement of emasculation. And then, but another measurement, which I talk about in my new book, is the emasculation of the Republican Party, and their fear, their cowardice, at their inability to stand up to not only the feminists but the left generally, Tucker Carlson made a brief little private video a year ago or so on this, in which he ridicules Republican men for their for being cowards, basically. Phyllis Schlafly used to do this. I knew Phyllis Schlafly well.
Oh, there we go. Phyllis Schlafly.
Talk about Republican politicians. The first word that came out of her mouth was cowards. She would call them cowards. So, this is just another, and these are the same men who talk about, manhood and man up, and they write books like Josh Hawley's book on men and a number of others. I can't remember them offhand. And they're all going on about Ward Cleaver and Leave It to Beaver and all these, television images of masculinity and so forth. And yet, they're, in some ways, they're the biggest cowards of all. They're the biggest sheep.
I couldn't agree more with you on that. It's funny. I'm kind of chuckling behind the scenes. My term for them is feckless and weak. Right? They'll talk the talk, but when it comes time to actually doing anything, they're not going to do it. The radio show that I do, which is political, it's not available online. Sorry, folks. It's local radio. My partner on that show is the head of the Republican Party. I'm trying to pause it, but so him and I'm more like, I lean libertarian mostly. Him and I go at it sometimes, and I always back him in the corner by saying,
"Oh my God, what a disaster!" Just a second, guys. I'm having major issues.
I found that I was basically blackballed, ostracized from the academic.
There we go. I completely lost the timestamp I was on just prior to this, and damn, that sucks.
Terrible injustice, and it needs to be. It came from the fact that the society refused to address an injustice. You cannot quarantine injustice after,
Oh well, I was just gonna say that's pretty much a typical TradCon, just not talking the talk, but then not doing anything once it comes to it.
It's very hard for people who have not experienced it to understand just how unjust and savage the family courts are, and the welfare system, and the social workers, and all these bastions of the radical feminist left. So, the more attention that can be brought to that, the better.
Again, I hate to agree with you on everything, but I'm going to, because I have long argued that shared parenting or fixing the mindset towards custody is the only issue right now that men should be addressing as far as that goes, right? Because until you fix that, who cares about child support? You got to fix that first. And so one of the arguments, when we were lobbying in New York for shared parenting, we had many guys go, it's not good enough. It doesn't do this. It doesn't do that. And we always argued saying, this is a huge elephant. We're not going to fix it all in one bill. You have to choose one thing. And let's try and get that through first. And then we'll worry about the other stuff, because the dominoes will start falling into place once we do that. But that is the problem with the men's movement, is that it's so fractured, and they can't seem to focus on one issue and stay there. It's right now false allegations, which are a legitimately huge issue, have bubbled up to the top. I'm getting more.
That's a great point about how fractured the men's rights community is. I mean, the manosphere as a whole is very fractured, and that's what makes it easy to kind of get hijacked by these other movements.
More response from people on that than anything else. I wanted to get your thoughts on that whole paradigm and the Me Too movement, and how that's going and how it's affecting society and relationships.
Well, that's a very good question. It's a very topical question, because yes, you're right. The false allegations of in the old days it used to be child abuse, but much more nowadays it's domestic violence. And this has hurt. Obviously hurts men. It's a device to get their children away from them and get them out of their homes. And it's a terrible injustice, and it needs to be prioritized. And more than that, it's also one that has spread to the larger society. I mean, you talked about the Me Too movement. The Me Too movement targeting, celebrities, politicians like Judge Kavanaugh, the Supreme Court Justice, or Bill Cosby, or the Prince of York, or any of the men, the prominent politicians who have been accused of, sexual abuse, sexual harassment, sexual assault. Why does this happen? Well, it happens because it's so successful in family court. The feminists found that they could get rid of inconvenient men by accusing them of domestic violence. And this is what they discovered in family court.
It's trying to get me to play an ad.
Your child's father, and you don't want him around. The way to do it is accuse him of domestic violence or child abuse, but usually domestic violence. Well, that was so spectacular.
I got like 30 seconds to stop it, and my mouse won't stop. Yo, Caesar, thanks for the donation. Just 1 second. My computer is like, okay, God, thank God I skipped it. Whew, that was close, man. I do not want to have to play ads on this. If ads ever get played on this and I can't stop it, what I'll do is I'll just pause the thing I'm reacting to and just hang out and chat with the chatters until the ads are gone and everything's there. You think things can turn around, or do things need to collapse to see a change? Man, that's a good question right there. Like, again, big shout out for the cash right there. Appreciate you. I might change the sound effect, but I like the money sounds. Thank you. Man, that's such a good question. When it comes to turning it around, I would say yeah, it probably needs to go down pretty hard. I mean, it needs to hit some sort of critical mass of problems before they start looking to change it. I don't ever think it'll. I mean, I know you probably don't mean this when you say turnaround, but I don't think it'll turn around to the way things were. But as far as like acknowledging injustices in like family law towards men, I mean, it would have to stop being profitable for them to finally change it. And the sad part is just like so much of it just runs on money. It's not about justice, Like we were talking about earlier, states having to establish paternity for kids born out of wedlock. They receive incentive payments to do that. The justice starts to leave once the money comes in, because now it's not about making sure we know exactly who the dad is biologically. It's about making sure we have dads for these kids, and if that, California is so strict on like if you're married or if you've signed paperwork at the birth and you find out later the kid's not yours, if the kid's over 2, you're not going to be able to challenge paternity and have it undone. And the reason really is because the state doesn't want to then add another child that does not have a legal father, because then it's going to make the numbers look bad and all these things. Child support makes men fathers that aren't biologically fathers all the time. And it will do nothing to help them fight that if that's already your situation. They don't care. That's your problem at that point. And it's all about achieving these performance measures and these goals. So it starts to lose nuance, is what I'm trying to say. And, maybe at a certain point, if we could stop it being profitable and start to have some kind of dive, birth rates is the big one everyone talks about now, or at least I've been seeing it on the news a little bit, trying to incentivize family creation. But I think, once something like that happens, then maybe they'll look at it again. So sadly, I think the answer is yes. Yes, that needs to happen. I'm sorry for the slowdown in the stream. I'm dealing with this weird issue. Like when I move my mouse, it skips frames and then it ends up like on the other side of the screen. So that is really annoying. I'd like to get through the rest of this, but if it doesn't allow me, I might have to, call it quits just to not torture everybody.
Grew up and started using it for other people, for high-profile politicians like Brett Kavanaugh or Bill Cosby or the Prince of York, or any number of these other, or Donald Trump, or So if you want to understand where this came from, it came from the fact that the society refused to address an injustice. You cannot quarantine injustice, after all. You cannot subject part of your population to injustice and expect the rest of the population to enjoy justice. Martin Luther King pointed this out again, the civil rights movement. King said an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Mm-hmm. You can't treat part of your population with systematic injustice and expect it to be confined just to them. And so this is what happened. Men in custody, fathers in custody cases were subjected to these obviously, flagrantly trumped up accusations of domestic violence, to get them thrown out of their homes, to get their children taken away, to get child support orders against them. And this worked so beautifully that the feminists started using it against conservative politicians and liberal politicians. And
it's an interesting theme that he kind of mentions about how it's happened to normal men first, and that now it starts to happen to the folks on the top. Klaus says, hey, my mouse is working again. Awesome. Low birth rates are compensated with immigration. They are not going to budge because of birth rates. Yeah, that's a thing that I think I've mentioned on stream before also, is that the immigration issue is downstream of family creation. And, one of the things that always kind of, I guess, weirds me out, it's like, I like to vote for folks on the right or Trump. I have twice. I voted for Obama twice, and I voted for Trump twice. That's who I voted for. And I'm not voting this election. I'm out. But it's just like, I get the issues and I know more recently in England, like they're worried about, oh God, it's trying to get me to play an ad again. They're worried about like England not being ethnically, English and all that stuff. I get it. But the main issue that they have is, oh wow, it was because my mouse was dying, and then when I plugged it in, now it's working. I can't believe that's what it was. The main issue that they have is that they need to form families with their own women or whatever, and it's like if their women don't want to come together and make families with them, that is some kind of other problem, and that they need to figure out why that is. And maybe it's not even maybe it's just nature doing its thing. I don't know. But birth rates and low birth rates definitely creates an incentive for the folks at the top to sort of let immigration come in unchecked, in order to bump up the labor force. That's kind of always what it is. And, again, working at child support, I saw a lot of undocumented immigrants come through the office. We had very little power over them because they're not in the system, so to speak. But like, let me give you an example. Like, there's a lot of things that happen in the U.S. where the government kind of looks the other way, in order to keep immigration, maybe I guess you can say illegal immigration happening. Like sometimes I'd see a case and it was an undocumented individual, and they would have like 2 incomes coming in. And I didn't know they were undocumented because they had a social security number associated. And it's like they had like 2 jobs with a pretty significant amount of money coming in. I'm like, wow, how are they working 2 full-time jobs? That's crazy. That's a lot of money that they're managing to do that. But then after calling the employers and figuring it out, they'd be like, no, we don't have, so-and-so over here. I don't know who you're talking about. One of the jobs would probably know from the name, but the other one wouldn't. And then what it would be is that person is using somebody else's social security number. And the way that the child support system works is that when we put a social security number or it comes into our system, it starts to generate information about that social security number. We get all the income information, bank accounts and stuff. So people that have nothing to do with child support, but their social security number is being used fraudulently by another employer in order to give an undocumented individual payment so that they can be on the payroll, the books. We would then see it on our end because now we have 2 incomes coming in for the same person. And it's not even like the person was passed away or something. It was like this was a living person. So what's crazy about that is like businesses and stuff can get away with doing things like that in order to get cheap labor or whatever easily. And our government and politicians know about that, but they choose to kind of turn the other way because I guess it helps prop up the economy or give it a little bit more juice or something. But it's clearly not supposed to be happening. See what I mean? So I kind of have a suspicion that there is this kind of background of I don't know, dirty politics or something going on that allows that to happen. And there's a lot of lip service. And I can understand from the perspective of of a U.S. citizen and you've lived here for generations with your family and you're just like, what the hell's going on, you know? Or even a UK citizen or something, you know what I mean? And they're unhappy about that, and I get it. You know, I totally get it. I do also try to put my my mind into the perspective of an immigrant. You gotta understand, if you're an immigrant, you come here and you're seeing things from an almost schizophrenic, like, you are confronted with a society that is like bipolar or schizophrenic. There's like one half of the society that's like, we love you. You know, we love multiculturalism. Please come here. You're what makes America great. Was founded on that. Then there's like the other half of society that's saying like the complete opposite. So if you come in here, you're looking at two competing value systems that like almost hate each other. And then it's like being a child growing up in a very dysfunctional household, or being a child between two divorced parents, and one parent is saying the opposite thing and the other parent is saying the opposite thing, and it's just like bad news all around, you know. But again, there's a lot of like fraud and just crazy things that happen. Maybe I should make a child support story time video about some of that stuff. Caesar Cortina says Raza. But yeah, so that, you know, that's the situation. But yeah, there's a dirty game behind this. There's big money behind this, you know. Guys, sorry about the kind of weird thing that was happening before. My mouse is back now. It turns out all I needed to do was plug in my mouse because it was dying.
Celebrities and you name it. So, you know, if you don't like it, maybe we should have addressed it and nipped it in the bud when they started using it in the family courts. Mm-hmm. And you know, this is what's happening for us, and yet they don't. If you want to look at if you want to look at what's happening to Donald Trump.
You know, the interesting thing about birth rates too, Klaus, is it's not even. It's more of a problem of developed nations. Like, I don't even know if it's specifically like a Western thing. I mean, this is also an issue in Japan, Korea, China, I think, Russia, like basically anywhere that's industrialized is dealing with this, you know. And the question is, okay, what do you do now? How do you incentivize this? You know, I think most people's complaint is that the cost and the risk is just too much. The men are probably like, this is way too risky, especially divorce. Women probably don't feel comfortable because, you know, cost of living is very high, you know, even for them too.
Look at what's been happening to fathers and men in family court for the last 25 years or more. And you've got your explanation there. And yet they won't do it. Alan Dershowitz won't do it. Jonathan Turley won't do it. None of them will do it. They won't point this out. And so the problem persists, and the problem gets worse. And it's just going to get worse until you go back and look at where it came from, what caused it, and root it out. And yet, you know, even the MAGA Republicans don't want to do this because they're terrified of the bar associations, mm-hmm. and they're terrified of the feminists in their own ranks, even, you know, feminists within the Republican Party or the feminists within the conservative organizations, the conservative feminists within the churches, the women within in the most conservative churches. So, you know, this is another of the fruits of emasculation.
Yeah, it's an interesting point you make about the.
You know, that concept of emasculation is important and something to think about also. And it's like, there are many whips that get you to kind of buy into the system. Like, if you want to be a MGTOW guy, like, both sides will have all kinds of insults to throw at you. Like, oh, you're not a man. You know, they always come directly to your masculinity to insult your masculinity. Like, you're not a man, you can't provide, you're not a real man. Feminist progressives will say that. The tradcons will say that. And I think meditating and thinking about what emasculation is or means and how you should react to that is important. Because if you can get to a place where you're, you are solid on what you believe in, and whatever they throw at you to try to attack your masculinity is ineffective and it doesn't work, then I'd say you're in a good place. But if you're controlled by that, they use this traditional idea of masculinity to control you, and you have to kind of break out of that conditioning, especially if things aren't going back to the way it used to be.
You know, the conservative women, the MAGA women, having spoken to them, and I speak to all across the political spectrum when it comes to men's and boys' issues, and one of the arguments I would make is the conservative women are the most damaging to men's issues because they have their blinders on as much as, let's say, the far left does.
See, that gets into the undercover feminists and the sort of trad wife thing. We talked about it before. Tradcons just completely enable feminism, and they kind of feed off of each other. And men are stuck in the middle of this, just being kind of ground to dust
with regards to men's and boys issues. But at least with the left, you know where they stand. The conservative women are more silent about it. They're like silent ninja assassins. You know,
and that kind of has to do with the what Coach talks about with his bait and switch. Oh, I finally got the clip. Let me see if I can play that. Sorry to change it again, but I want to share kind of what he was talking about.
But really, the basis of our communication is we're just trying to get our whistle wet.
Okay, let's see if I can make that to a big screen.
But really, the basis of our communication is we're just trying to get our whistle wet. Sometimes there's strategies to get your whistle wet. Okay, we can get your whistle wet over here. Pause. You can get your whistle wet, but I don't want to do that. I want her to like me. Right? But that is the basis of the free agent lifestyle. We're not trying to get you to learn how to control manipulative women. I'm not the snake charmer. Right? I'm not the snake charmer. PUAs and dating coaches, they want you to get in front of the snake and be like, oh, yeah, that's what they want you to do. I'm not telling you to get in front of the snake and do a damn thing. All right, here we go, right here.
I love that clip, man. I think that makes so much sense, and I think it really highlights the difference between like MGTOW free agent guys and, you know, like the pickup guys and all that stuff. It's not about trying to charm the snake. It's just trying to live life out here.
They will torpedo, you know, we're trying to get a shelter open for
this is back to how conservative women impede men issues progress.
Men in Atlanta, Georgia. And I'm working on, you know, behind the...
Yo, JP, welcome in, man. Good to see you. Shout out to Coach. Yep, big shout out to Coach. Free Agent Lifestyle. He's one of my favorite channels. Every morning when let me tell you, Coach reacting to me was like, that was like a dream come true. I just thought I didn't expect that. I mean, I knew it was possible when I did that interview with Pearl, but I didn't know it would happen. And I actually listen to Coach like every morning when I'm making my breakfast and driving to work. He's on my cell phone and I'm listening to him. And he does an evening show. I don't watch the evening show too much, but I happened to be listening to the evening show that day and I was making dinner and I was like, let's listen to Coach. And then he started talking about, like, you know, there's this guy and he's talking about child support. And I'm like, man, I wonder who he's talking about. I wonder whose clip he's going to play. Like, I was like, what if somebody saw my interview with Pearl and they just started saying the same thing? And then that got Coach's attention. And all of a sudden he changed the screen and I was on the screen and I was like, this is amazing. Like, it almost brought a freaking tear to my eye. You know, maybe it did a little bit. But we're just going to say it almost did. And, man, that was just so freaking cool. Because it's like, I'm actually a fan of his channel. So for him to react to me was like on another, it was pretty cool.
Scenes, because I want to get one in North Carolina at some point. And where I'm getting the most pushback is Republican women. And I'm like,
yeah,
why? Where does it benefit you as a Republican to say that men don't deserve help?
Man, what he's talking about is very, very important right now because, you know, in order for like men's issues to go through, like with feminism, they had support of men on some side, you know, to help them push stuff through. For men on the return, we do need a little bit of women's buy-in, especially with women being a large voter base. And to not have conservative women trying to help men it really is, you know, a disappointment. Talk about a fever dream. Yeah, it really was. Man, it was, I could not believe it. I have like so many screenshots of me on the screen with Coach reacting just for posterity's sake. I even went back and just recorded that clip of him reacting to me just in case, because you never know with YouTube, you know what I mean? And it was just like, I want that saved. That was like a real badge of honor right there.
And they don't want to answer that question, but they're so silent. They're ninja-like is the term I'll use with it.
See, and this is what It's Complicated channel. He has an episode called Undercover Feminists. We reacted to it on here, but he's calling them ninjas. That would be a kind of a funny term also, ninja feminists. But really, they're just silent feminists. They silently agree with the other side. Because, that video we watched last week with that YouTuber Manifestel, where she openly talks about cherry-picking parts of conservatism, cherry-picking parts of progressivism, and all these other things. That's really what they're doing. So they don't want to give up their power.
And I think it creates far more issues than the more overt, quote unquote stereotypical feminists that's out there screaming, the blue hair, purple hair, whatever hair color they have this week. And I think it's damaging not just men, but society as a whole. Would you agree?
Oh, very much so. Yeah, I had to go back to Phyllis Schlafly. She was one of the very, very prominent, powerful Republican.
And we looked at an article with her. Let me see if I can bring that up, just to show you. So this is who he's talking about, Phyllis Schlafly. Thank you, Robert, for showing me exactly how to pronounce that.
Anti-feminist woman back in the the 70s and the 80s. And the 90s, and right up until her death, women in the world or something, and one of the most important, influential Americans. And yet, when she took this up, she did take this up. Her son was victimized in family court by this. He lost his children, and she took this up. And she contacted me, and we worked together a bit on it. And she said the biggest opposition she came across was from her own organization. She headed this huge organization, Eagle Forum, and they had chapters in every state. And she said that her biggest blowback, the biggest pushback she got was from the women in the local chapters when she tried to criticize the family courts. And it's just, here is one of the most important and powerful and influential women in American history. And she was, they didn't hesitate to trash her. I saw her try to bring this up once with Senator Rick Santorum. I stood there next to her. Mm-hmm. Wow. She brought this up to Senator Rick Santorum, was a U.S. senator who was pushing for family values. He created an organization, he made himself a champion of family values, and he just ignored her. He just humiliated her in the most ruthless manner. I've never seen. I really realized that the man was a complete fraud when I saw that happen. And this, I see a lot of this in the conservative.
That's really interesting, and you got to think like why that is. I mean, I know we try to get to the bottom of it over here, but it's just like why. Even to a woman trying to advocate for that, it's like especially them. It's almost like they're like a bigger problem. But you think they would want to help, but they really don't. It's almost insidious.
Movement. It's amazing. These organizations like the Family Research Council and Focus on the Family. I mean, they're just they have no regard for the family whatsoever. I mean, they're just unbelievable.
Yeah, it begs the question because one of the things that I've often put out is there's so little funding to help men, whether it's regard to family court, mental illness, homelessness, the list goes on. What little funds that, let's say through grants or other means that the government or organizations provide, tends to go to those groups though, and they don't do anything with it. That's why I say they're far more damaging than those who are so vocally opposed and don't hide what they're doing. And I guess the question I have for you is, how do we get them to wake up? I mean, is it so political that they can't, or it's to their benefit not to? Or
it's to their benefit not to. Yeah.
Okay.
A lot of them are full of lawyers, lobbyists, and lawyers who are part of the bar associations who collect child support They have connections with people like.
This is interesting because, you know, he someone like him who's like well educated, he's looked into this stuff and he understands it really well. That's the stuff that's kind of a mystery to me, like these organizations or these groups that are supposed to help us. What are they doing? How are they getting their money? Why aren't they helping?
You know, the state attorneys general and, you know, like Josh Hawley and the state governments who are making money hand over fist on child support enforcement. And so, you know, they have pecuniary interests in it. And so they're never going to wake up. They simply need to be, you know, I point out in my new book, they don't, even the battles they take up, you know, the battles for against same-sex marriage or the battles against the homosexual agenda or transgenderism, they lose every battle. They lose every battle they engage in. Mm-hmm. They can't win anything. So, you know, the best thing is stop sending them money. Stop supporting them. Stop giving them any credence. They're so slick. Example that I gave you, recently I heard a woman named Mary Eberstadt, who claims to be one of these champions of the family. She was talking in a public forum, and some woman asked her a question about all of the injustices against men and the injustices of family court and the terrible things that go on with fathers. And Eberstadt took her question and she said, she said, "Oh, I couldn't agree with you more." And then she restated the question in such a way that it blamed the men. It made the men sound like the men were, you know, abandoning their children and nothing about the courts, nothing about the welfare agencies. And she just restated the whole thing in such a self-serving way.
That's like pure gaslighting.
And too many men and women are taken in by this. They think these people are the champions of families when they're not. They're simply not. And, you know, they mustn't be, you know, unless they come around, and there's a few that might if they have the incentive to do it. But, you know, until they do, until they show some good faith, they really aren't deserving of anyone's trust anymore.
Do you think we've reached a point where it is irreversible, or that, you know, like you said, we might get some change, but we're not going to see anything major? Do you think we've reached that point? That's a great question.
Well, yeah, there is a certain stubbornness about all of this. I mean, like I said, you know, the Republican Party does nothing but lose, and yet they just keep doing the same thing. This is kind of one of the themes of my new book. The conservative groups, generally, all conservative groups of all kinds, they do nothing but lose. They lose every battle, and yet they keep doing the same thing. The specific conservative groups that deal with the family and sexuality and these sorts of things, they lose every battle, and yet they keep doing the same thing. I don't know where they're getting their money these days because they do nothing but lose. So I don't know why anybody, you know, would support them. I guess they get money from foundations and, like you say, sometimes even the federal government. But, you know, they do nothing but lose. So maybe this is a good thing. I mean, maybe this is the fact that they can't win any battles, and people will start realizing it. I did review a book recently. A book did come out from the
That's kind of how I feel about, especially with a lot of conservatives and things like that, especially when it comes to family law or these issues, that they just have not really done anything substantive in, I don't even know, I don't want to say ever, but in a long time as regards to this. So at a certain point, it's like I just can't hand over the vote anymore. Just even, that's my small little protest, you know, even though it probably will have obviously very little impact, but that's just how I feel.
Institute, and they even admitted this. It was full of a dozen or so essays from various scholars. And the theme of the book was basically not just the Republican Party, but the conservative movement generally, they lose every battle. And they do. So, but they didn't seem to have any remedies for it. They didn't seem to have any solutions.
Yeah, it's again, it goes back to they talk the talk, but they never walk the walk. And I mean,
so much of it is just lip service, especially when you see like these bigger TradCon media outlets and things like that, or even politicians. It's just lip service, and then nothing changes.
Again, I'm biased. I'm a man. Worse. I fight on men's and boys issues, as do you. I got to believe if I'm a head of the Republican Party or a conservative group or whatever, I would be embracing this stuff, not giving it lip service. I would say,
there you go, lip service.
Pick an issue. You know, we're going to ensure that there's a domestic violence shelter or help for men in every state. We're going to fix education. So
fight paternity fraud, help out with men's custody issues of their children.
That boys aren't lagging behind. We're going to address fatherlessness. We're going to do it. They'll talk all day long, but they never want to fix it. And they'll throw gobs of money, God knows where it's going, never getting any results. And what I'm seeing, and again, this goes back to social media, the average person's got more of a voice now, and it's percolating under the surface. And I would love to sit down with Mark Meadows or somebody in the Republican Party and say, we wake up. Do you realize that there is this huge swath, men and women, by the way, that would love to come out and support an organization that is going to fix and address some of these issues? Because I hate to break it to you, but for every boy, there's a mom who birthed them and cares about them. But they just will not do it. And, you know, the definition of insanity, right? They just keep repeating it over and over again. And I ask, at what point do you think they'll wake up? I don't think they will, but because it's just getting worse by the day.
Well, I do think there is one. I do see one hope, and that is we alluded to this earlier at the beginning. The men who are just giving up, the men who are just
the MGTOW guys, the MGTOW
men.
There we go.
Men going their own way. The men who are basically engaged in an impromptu, spontaneous boycott of marriage and family and women and children, and just refusing to take part. And this is sending the conservative groups, especially apoplectic. It's making them, they just, they're vilifying the men, they're ranting, they're raving Josh Hawley and these televangelists, and, they're just demonizing the men.
See, the demonization doesn't just come from the progressive liberal side, it comes, or left side, it comes from the right also. And you're not even doing anything illegal, you're just not playing the game, but they're like, you're just horrible.
Not
if you do that,
families and not starting. Well, men aren't going to do it. All the scolding. Nobody ever got anywhere by scolding people, and it's not going to happen.
Exactly.
And I myself do not endorse this MGTOW thing. There's a good book.
Come on, doctor. Give us the endorsement.
By the way, Helen Smith wrote a book a few years ago called The Marriage Strike.
I remember that. Yes, I've read that book. Excellent book.
Excellent book, and it really deserves attention because she pointed this out. She wasn't the first. A couple of some journalists had been pointing it out. Glenn Sachs and some others had pointed this out in newspapers, and then Helen wrote this excellent book, which I think should be front page these days because it explains all of it. And she showed very clearly the reason for it: the injustices of the family courts, the injustices of the welfare agencies and the social workers, and all this. And I don't endorse this, but what I do think I don't endorse this as a lifestyle, as a permanent lifestyle option for men. I think men should and want to have families, procreate within marriage.
I think a lot of the MGTOW guys I think do as well. I don't think they disagree with them. It's just it's a juice ain't worth the squeeze kind of argument coming from the MGTOW side.
Marry women, have children within the bonds of wedlock, raise those children, and propagate the species and continue the civilization. In principle, that's what they should do. So I don't favor this, boycotting this, except insofar as any strike, the purpose of any strike is to change the law, to deal with a grievance and to change an injustice. So I don't agree with this boycott if it's an indefinite, if it's open-ended and it goes on forever. This is wrong. But if it's used as leverage to change the law, to reform the courts, to reform the welfare system, then I think it's a perfectly justifiable and understandable strategy.
Yeah, and I think he's right. The unfortunate part is we have to play this game of chicken basically, and it's just. It's almost a war we're fighting, and men are, I don't like to say men are disposable, but it's like if you're gonna get drafted, and this is our draft. Sorry, you got drafted to the MGTOW cause, and maybe a lot of us are giving up things, but if this is the only way for change, then it's like It just needs to be done. But they've kind of pushed so many men into this situation, you know.
It's interesting that you say that, because I'm an advocate for men walking away right now.
Oh, but here we go. Okay, we got an advocate. Very nice.
It's for the exact reason you're talking about. It's this.
Guys, make sure to subscribe to Men Need to Be Heard.
Send the message. If I believe if men don't walk away, nothing's going to change. But if enough of them walk away, that, you know, birth rates decline, society starts collapsing. Women can't find it's going to create such an uproar that men will finally be heard. I agree with you completely.
This kind of touches to Caesar's question earlier, and I think some of the other folks, I think Mr. Pitt also, he's kind of saying that, you know, that it needs to hit this sort of point, this kind of collapse point, to where there's an uproar until men are finally being heard. As a
long-term solution strategy, no, it's not good for men, it's not good for women, it's not good for society. We need to be together, but I think at least in the next 20 to 50 years, that's what men need to do. It's not going to change overnight. You know, they're showing now, the data is showing that by 2030, well over half of women are going to be alone and childless. That's when it's really going to start hitting home. But I do think it's a point, we've reached a point where men have to do that. And as opposed to, say, a violent type uprising, which I would never suborn, this is a way for men to send that message. And it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. This is how men can bring about change, right? Is by saying, we're done. We're going to walk away. You figure it out now, because you don't want to listen to us. You don't want to hear what we're saying. So we're going to let you figure it out. And then you'll come back to us ready to listen. And that's what I'm a strong advocate for, with the understanding, though, that this needs to be temporary, because long term, it's not good for the human species, let alone, you know, any particular society.
No, that's precisely true. And I think it can have larger benefits for our society, too. I mean, my next book is going to be about the whole, you know, the last 4 years of mainstream politics and how the left has taken over politics. And I'm not the only one. A number of people have written books and articles about this. And yet all of them, conservatives especially, and the conservatives, they can't come up with any solution. They say that the left is taking over everything. The left is taking over the United States, the woke ideology, and, you know, the left is just, you know, we've lost and they've won. Mm-hmm. And yet they cannot come up with any solution.
Yeah, that's you know, fortunately the case. And, you know, it's just men need to do better, or shaming men. I think one of the problems that men have too is not being able to admit when we as men are victims. You know, the pull yourself up by the bootstraps and the self-improvement stuff is, you know, I get that. You know, you can't, sometimes obviously people can romance themselves into thinking they're victims when they're not. But in certain situations, like when it comes to family law, men are the victims. And we need to accept that to be able to get together and try to fix the problem.
Because they don't want to look at the causes of it. And my argument is, if you want a solution, you look at what people are doing spontaneously anyway. And you try to guide that spontaneous action into constructive ends. And I think that's what we should all be doing. The men who are engaged in this spontaneous strike of marriage and the family, they should be encouraged, but they should be encouraged to channel that withdrawal, not a withdrawal, but to channel it into constructive, as you just said, constructive reform.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the constructive reform would take, you know, some kind of leadership, some kind of platform being put forward, and ideally some kind of organization that can lobby, you know. And it's just like, to lobby and do all that, you have to know what you want, and that takes some understanding of the legal system and what's wrong with it, and saying, hey, this is what we need changed. We got to look under the hood of the car and figure out what's wrong and fix it. So being upset is one thing, but then coming together and saying, here's how we propose to fix it is important. I think we're about an hour and 18 minutes. It's an hour and 32 minutes. I'm sure a lot of this is, you know, pretty much the same. I'm going to put, is there comments here? There's only, there's only 6 comments on this. And 39 likes. Like, I really feel like I need to put something in here for engagement because more people need to see this. Great interview. As a former, the heck with it. I don't know. I just want to put something in here just so maybe YouTube pushes this a bit. He's got 12,000 subscribers, so I feel like it should have more views than just 350. Great interview. Dr. Stephen Baskerville really knows his stuff on this issue. More people need to watch this. I just feel like this interview is so good, and it would probably make this gentleman feel better to feel some kind of encouragement for the hard work that he did making this interview, and hopefully more folks see it. But yeah, I'll probably call it on watching it there. I don't know why. I'm kind of in the mood to stream tomorrow. I kind of feel like doing a fun stream, which I normally don't like doing on YouTube because I don't want to bog down the YouTube with me just having fun playing games or something. But I might do it anyways and just delete it afterwards. But dang, oh man, Caesar, the generosity is, I gotta come up with a special sound effect, for that. But thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Good stream as always. See you next time, Shah. See you as well. And I appreciate you guys all being in here. It makes the stream fun, and I very much appreciate the donations. I'll try to honor that and be responsible with that. But yeah, I enjoy streaming, and watching stuff like that is really good. Oh, I do want to, before I go, maybe show you guys, I don't know, we'll see how you guys feel about this. What I want to stream next week is I might do that Doug Wilson. Oh crap. The Doug Wilson interview. So this is what Doug Wilson, I don't know if he's a controversial, he's a church pastor. And listening to the kind of religious people talk is interesting to me because I do try to understand what their perspective is and what their plan is, because they're reacting to this stuff too. And it's like, okay, what are guys like this going to do differently? So I had listened to this like 5 minutes of it, and I thought it was pretty interesting how the church fails men. But it was part of a larger interview. And I'm thinking next week, God, I hope I don't forget, but next week, sometimes something just comes up that I feel like, oh, let me react to this. This was supposed to be this week's interview, but I thought we'd go over this. And I'm glad we went over this one because I think this was a really good interview. But next week, I'm thinking maybe we could touch on this and go over this topic. It looks like it was a pretty good interview. And I've done a video where I looked at some of his stuff before. This guy, Pastor Doug Wilson, I think he's pretty interesting. So that'll be next week. Unless something really wild happens and we just got to react to it. Then I'll put that in the pile of other streams I got to do. But yeah, if you guys see me go live tomorrow, no pressure. Maybe I'll just do like a video game stream. Maybe I'll just keep it to Twitch or something instead of YouTube. But I got a day off tomorrow and I just want to fly my drone and have a good time. So again, everybody, thanks for being in here. Thanks for being in here. Klaus, Mr. Pitt, JP, Robert, Spencer, Trevor, Caesar, Quintana, and all the other folks. So I will see you guys soon, and everyone, I hope you guys have a great rest of your weekend.